Hello? Anybody home?
Today, I want you to open your mind.
The following program contains material of an enlightening matter. Open-mindedness is advised.
I've almost come to the conclusion that the story is so damning that the mass of people can't deal with it.
Sooner or later, you have to bring in an element of persuasion, an element of getting people to consent to what is happening to them. We are in process of developing a whole series of techniques to get people actually to love their servitude.
We face a hostile ideology, global in scope, atheistic in character, ruthless in purpose, and insidious in method.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
To change the minds and the attitudes and the beliefs of the people of the world, and especially the United States, to bring about one world socialist totalitarian government.
If you can get people to consent to the state of affairs in which they are living, then you have a much more easily controllable society than you would if you were relying wholly on clubs and firing squads and concentration camps.
The tools of conquest do not necessarily come with bombs and explosions and fallout. There are weapons that are simply thoughts, attitudes, prejudices, to be found only in the minds of men.
On infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day.
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
As you connect the dots between different people, organizations, places, religions, history, suddenly the picture starts to form. If you don't connect the dots, it's just a mass of what's all this about.
The kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure.
Someone born in the United States is not more special than someone born in Mexico. Someone who is white is not more special than someone who is black. They're just vehicles for the consciousness to experience.
Brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people.
War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength.
Humans as a species are prone to amnesia. Those who do not remember the past are doomed to repeat it. It is thus imperative that these all-important matters be thoroughly explored and not left up to blind faith.
About time some of you got acquainted with the real hard truth.
What you are now experiencing is the vibration of air particles being transformed into electrical signals by your senses and DNA, then sent to the brain, where they are decoded into sounds. I'm your host, Ryan Gable, and you are listening to the Secret Teachings radio broadcast. If you'd like to contact me for any reason, the email is rdgable@yahoo.com. That's rdgable@yahoo.com. That's the way that you can reach me during the broadcast and after the broadcast. The social media page is facebook.com/The Secret Teachings, and the website is www.thesecretteachings.info. And if you go on over to the website, you'll find a full list of upcoming and previous show topics. You'll find a top news archive with all of the news stories we discuss, not on every show, but on most shows. And you'll also find the air times for the show, Monday through Friday, 12 to 3 a.m. U.S. Pacific Time, exclusively now on the Fringe FM. And you can also visit their website, the Fringe FM. You'll find links to listen in other ways. If you're not listening directly through the Fringe FM, you can find us through the Fringe FM, but on the Paranormal Radio app that you can download for free, along with the TuneIn application and TalkStream Live. On our website also, you can find merchandise for the Secret Teachings. We have t-shirts, my book, Occult Arcana, and our subscription service, which gets you access to the full show archive so that you can download and stream every one of our broadcasts, take it with you, listen at your leisure, great guests, and timeless, unique analysis of literally hundreds of different subjects. Some subjects most of you probably have an interest in already, but I like to provide a different and unique perspective on many of those subjects. This evening, I have a guest, and that guest is going to talk with us about some very interesting things, to say the least. And I think that his content is perfect for this radio broadcast, The Secret Teachings, in relationship to one of my favorite topics, in addressing the entertainment industry, and specifically for me, addressing music videos and the music industry, and looking at the symbolism, looking at the esoteric and occult nature of what we see in music and what we see in movies and television and news, what we see in books and magazines. We see these common golden threads, and you can dismiss them as coincidences. You can dismiss them as anomalies, but after a while, what is an anomaly and what is a coincidence becomes a pattern. And that pattern is what we look at here on The Secret Teachings. One of my favorite subjects is the symbolism that we find in entertainment. And to start out, I wanted to define the word entertain, as I've discussed before. The word entertain is defined as to give attention or consideration. And most of you, I know myself, I have heard this many times, energy flows where attention goes. So we give attention, we give consideration to the bread and to the circuses. We entertain ourselves through movies and television programming, through books, through news, through music videos. And when we watch television, if we're talking more psychological and physiological and scientifically, our ability to process information, our ability to be more consciously aware is limited when we're watching television, when we're listening to music. And of course, we know about subliminal messages, subliminal advertising. It goes far beyond subliminal advertising for a product, subliminal advertising for a political agenda, or for perhaps a more darker, some might say religious, or to use the word improperly, a more occult agenda, but I don't really call it occult, I call it a cult agenda. And whatever that is, I'm not necessarily sure I can give you the answer to. I can point you in the right direction, and I can tell you that regardless of what you choose to believe about your favorite celebrities, your favorite musicians, nevertheless, there is a tremendous amount of evidence that shows us that there is a very strange pattern with a variety of different subjects that all get grouped into a cult. And by understanding the occult, we can look at these things and we can see how there's been a perversion of certain sacred concepts and symbols and so on and so forth. So entertainment. To entertain is to give attention or consideration. We know that energy flows where attention goes. And we've looked at on this broadcast world events. We've looked at the Super Bowl. We've looked at the Olympics, the halftime show, and the opening and closing ceremonies. We've broken that down on this show. We've broken it down with Clyde Lewis on Ground Zero as well. And we look at how many millions of people watch something like that and why it's a perfect platform for political agendas, for political advertising, for product advertising, and also not just because everything that we process, millions and millions and millions of sensations a second, only a handful, only a few dozen are processed into a conscious field of existence, into our conscious realization, our conscious three-dimensional world. The rest is stored in the subconscious. So no matter what it is, whether you're being sold a product, or you're being sold a political ideology, or you're being sold a cult concept, if you will, how much of what we actually think is our own thinking? how much of what we actually think is the byproduct of all of the things that I've mentioned and more that are implanting these ideas and urging us subconsciously, leaking and seeping into the conscious to buy certain things, to think certain things, to act a certain way. All of that is so incredibly important and to me so incredibly fascinating. And we'll talk about that and a lot more this evening with our guest, Mark Devlin. He is a UK-based radio DJ, UK-based club DJ, a music journalist, and he is an author. He's written 2 books. The first one I have here on my desk called Musical Truth, and he followed that up with Volume 2 of Musical Truth. That came out this year, 2018. And his research focuses on how mainstream music and A-list artists are essentially used to manipulate their audiences. This is a form of mind control, and it is part of a much larger agenda. His website, www.markdevlin.co.uk. Mark, my friend, welcome to The Secret Teachings. How are you?
I'm good, Ryan. Thanks for having me on, man. And I enjoyed your monologue there. I think you've pretty much encapsulated the whole scenario of what we're talking about. And I just mentioned to you on the chat that I enjoyed the intro to your show as well, with that montage of voices. It was like a pub quiz for me. I was playing Name That Speaker. So that's a great intro to the show, mate.
I appreciate it. I appreciate the kind words. And I think that you got them all. You got Huxley, Chaplin, Cooper, Maxwell, and David Icke. I think you named them all.
Yeah, I think Charlie Chaplin was a bit of an oddball, and maybe Aldous Huxley, but I've heard those before, so yeah, I was familiar with those.
Well, you know that Huxley quote, I like to use that a lot because whether it's entertainment in the sense of music and movies or television or it's political entertainment, whatever it is, it seems like people have learned to love their servitude. And I think a lot of that's done through the entertainment industry.
Well, especially now when you've got armies of people walking down the street with their face buried into their smartphone, running their entire lives off of technology and completely oblivious to their natural surroundings. I think that was probably the long game that the likes of Huxley had in mind back in the day for where they wanted to take society. And really, you have to take your hat off to them for a job well done when you look at the type of society we've got now. But also, you know, his quote gives away this tenet of placing the truth in plain sight that we see playing out so often, where the controllers that are pulling all the strings and calling all the shots seem to feel the need to place the truth of a matter right there in front of our noses so that we cannot make the claim that we weren't in some way told what they plan to do. This is revelation of the method, and it's a major spiritual tenet, I would say, of the occult controllers of these industries and of all walks of life, actually. And I go into this majorly in my books and in my talks because I think it's a very key thing. They certainly see this as a doctrine that they work by and adhere to. And if we can understand that dynamic better, then we can do a better job at second guessing what they plan to do next, I would suggest.
And I think that also helps us to override consciously the subconscious manipulation.
Right. I mean, one thing that a lot of people say to me frequently is, you spend all this time exposing all these different music movements and telling us where these certain musicians and bands came from and who their families were and what their affiliations were and all of that. And yet you're still someone that listens to music. You know, how can you still enjoy these bands' music when you know what it was used for? And my response is always, well, when you do the research and can understand what these acts were most likely being used for in terms of culture creation, mass mind control, shaping societal values and belief systems in large numbers of people, once you can understand the methods that were used, you stand a chance of breaking the mind control, breaking the spell.
Yes.
And it's no longer having that subliminal effect on you. You know, you nailed it in your opening speech there, where you talked about all this subliminal messaging, which is aimed at the subconscious mind. That's where it works its magic. That's where it has its effects on you. And That's a very real thing. It can actually dictate the thoughts, emotions, and even behaviors of people without them realizing it's going on. Many years ago, I would have denied that was the case, and I would have said there's no way that listening to certain music or watching movies can dictate the way you behave. But when you do the research and you dig into it and you understand the methods that are used, you realize that it's absolutely a thing. But once you get it out of the subconscious mind and into the conscious, where it can be properly understood and processed, and it's no longer having that effect on you, then you can, if you choose, continue to enjoy the music for music's sake. Because many of these manipulated bands, we could look at the likes of the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Doors, Led Zeppelin, the Police. It's pretty clear what these groups were and where they came from and you know what agendas they were serving. But they made bloody good music. They're some of the top bands that have ever done it. And, you know, that's the reason why they were elevated to these premier positions, because they were very good at what they did. I guess they had the best training at their lifetime actor schools. Mm-hmm. But they made very good music, and you don't have to throw all of that out. If you're a lifelong Beatles fan and then you discover that, well, actually they probably didn't come from where you thought they did. It probably wasn't a case of these 4 young lads from Liverpool playing a few gigs, working really hard, crossing their fingers for good luck and making it big time against all the odds, against all the competition. They probably had a little bit of a helping hand to get to that level of influential position. But once you understand that, you don't have to throw out all your old Beatles albums. You can continue to enjoy the music because now it's into your conscious mind and you're always consciously aware that they were working to some social engineering agenda or other. But, you know, it's no longer having that controlling effect on you in the way it does people that haven't woken up to this truth yet. So there's an important distinction to be made there, I feel.
Very well said, Mark. I agree with you. And I wanted to comment, and then I have another question for you. And on the subject of magic and on the subject of this revealing of the method in black magic in particular, and in the writings of magicians like Eliphas Levi, he wrote about how the more horrible the operation, the more powerful it acts on the imagination. And he wrote about how when something is produced publicly, when people are told that they're being manipulated, that they're being ripped off, if you will, it actually provides the operator with more power to do more harm to those people because they're being told what's happening and they're neglecting, refusing, or naively accepting that this is happening and they're not doing anything about it. So in a sense, they are relinquishing their free will to the magical operator to control them. And that is a form of magical mind control.
Absolutely.
The question I want to ask you is, though, about songs specifically. So let's say we took, I'm not going to name any specific bands, but let's say we took 10 bands or a few bands and a few artists, and we looked at their music videos, we looked at their music. I find that in terms of symbolism, you could have a hip-hop artist, you could have a rock star, you could have a pop star, you could have a country singer, and you have this mashup of where, generally speaking, their music's not all different, or it's not all the same, rather. It's different. But then you find that there's this thread between all of them where you'll have a pop star, a hip-hop artist, and so on and so forth. They'll do a song that is very, very similar in terms of symbolism, in terms of the lyrics, to all of the other different genres. And it's like one of those comes out one or two every album. And it kind of connects with these other genres of music, almost as if it's being orchestrated from a central musical hub, if you will, and then it's being directed out towards all forms of music. Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's templates and blueprints that come through the industry. And they just roll out these different artists on conveyor belts, so it seems very often, particularly with this insipid, vacuous style of pop music that we've now got, you know, the Taylor Swifts and the Miley Cyruses and the Keshas and the Katy Perrys and all these ridiculous pop puppets that are all just clones of each other. There's many instances of songs that have been prepared for a particular artist, and then at the last minute they switch the artist. So there's an example I name in my book of a song that was prepared for Britney Spears. It was all ready to go as one of her next pieces of output. And then at the last minute, it was decided, oh, we'll give it to Rihanna instead. So they're all interchangeable. when it comes to that level of music. But you come to realize that the manipulations apply to all genres of music. And I feel like I'm going sort of scene by scene, movement by movement in my research. It's very obvious with some. I mean, when you look at the whole 60s counterculture hippie scene and all those bands that came out of Laurel Canyon, that research has been done to death. And it's blatantly obvious that all those bands were controlled and have connections going back into the military and military intelligence and stuff. But actually, you find that with all genres. So I've really dug into hip-hop in a big way. I've got lots of questions now about the origins of hip-hop culture itself. This was all sparked by the revelations about Afrika Bambaataa, who's considered one of the founding fathers of hip-hop culture. He's one of the big three, alongside Kool Herc and Grandmaster Flash, that anyone who's into hip-hop is trained to think of as a guru, like a demigod of that whole scene. But a couple of years ago, you had a couple of guys that had been part of the Universal Zulu Nation, this organization, which seems to have been more a mind control cult and a sort of quasi-religious organization that Bambaataa headed up. And they accused him of having sexually molested them when they were young boys. And many other people have come forth since and said, yeah, it's kind of a best kept secret within the industry that Bambaataa likes little boys. So that, to me, calls into question the whole origins of that movement. Because I've started to look at some of the symbolism involved in the early days of hip-hop. There seem to be links to Freemasonry. There's certainly links to organizations like the Nation of Islam and the 5% Nation of Gods and Earths, which are religious kind of secret society type operations. So, hip-hop then becomes tarnished. Then you can look at electronic dance music. I've also done a lot of work into that recently, particularly because in the UK right now, we're on the 30th anniversary of what was known as the acid house scene. And that was the birth of rave culture, dance music culture, which spread from the UK to other countries across Europe. And then in more recent years, it's become a really big thing in America. And the origins of this whole movement that swept the world would appear to have been in that UK scene that emerged in 1987-88. We've just had some shows on BBC 4 mainstream TV here in the UK called How Dance Music Conquered the World. And it's like the official account of how this music really took a foothold. So it starts off looking at early New York disco and Chicago house, and then it takes it all the way to present day, where we're currently at with this electronic dance music scene that's big all over the world. And they tell the Wikipedia version of events and all these myths and legends that's supposed to explain where this scene came from and how it all grew up. But if you're someone that goes beyond the surface narrative and does a bit of digging, it becomes very clear that that whole scene was a construct. That whole scene has the fingerprints of military intelligence all over it. It's a wild coincidence that the emergence of ecstasy, MDMA, just happened to coincide with the birth of house music and the emergence of all these records. So now you've got that scene, which is tarnished if you're someone that is open-minded and is going to go where the research takes you. And so you go genre by genre. I've just done a show on my podcast series looking at country music. Now, I'm not a big country fan. I know very little about the scene, but my guest was walking me through many of the artists that have been influential in that whole thing. And would you believe it? There's family backgrounds steeped in military careers there too. And so it's the case with punk and new wave, with heavy rock, heavy metal, with grunge. You're going to find it with every genre you look at. Jazz, people have said to me, you need to dig into the jazz scene because there's stuff to be found there. You'd probably even find it in classical. I'm sure you would, because the controllers that preside over these industries would not allow any kind of scene or movement or any kind of big band or musician who's got household name status and everyone's heard of them to rise to those positions of prominence if they weren't in some way controlled and doing the bidding of those that control all these different aspects of life. They just would not leave it to chance which of these become big in that way. So you come to realize that the entire entertainment industry from day one was set up to have this mind controlling effect on large numbers of people. It provides the perfect vehicle through which to achieve that, because it all happens under the guise of entertainment. And when people think they're being entertained, they've got no reason to pay attention to any fine detail of what's going on. They just allow themselves to be swept along on the wave of it all, and their guard is down. They think, oh, it's just a bit of fun. I'm just unwinding and enjoying myself.
It's just a movie. It's just a TV show.
Yeah. Yeah, nobody's expected to be mind controlled when they think they're just enjoying themselves in a bit of downtime.
Yes.
So it really is the perfect way to get to the minds and the hearts of souls of large numbers of people. And also, in most cases, people are paying for their own mind control. You go out and pay to see a movie. You pay for satellite TV at home. You go out and pay for an album, or to go and see a band, or to go to a nightclub. And all the time you're being programmed and brainwashed to a very large extent by all this entertainment, and you're paying for it.
Yeah, I mean, look at how much the Pentagon in the United States and the Department of Defense has a say in major Hollywood movies. You can't even use military equipment unless the Pentagon approves the script.
Well, that's right. They've got a whole department that liaises with film studios to agree on what can be shown and what kind of impression they're going to portray of things like the CIA and the military.
So it's propaganda.
They've got a whole department that's set up just to do that as their full-time job. And it's a similar thing with music. Like I said, these scenes would not be allowed to become this influential if they weren't doing some kind of bidding for the system.
When I go to a store, I hear pop music. Otherwise, I don't listen to it. And it could be a very obscure song I've never heard before, or it could be something that I've heard literally hundreds and hundreds of times. And every time I hear something like that, because I don't listen to pop music, I really don't listen to a lot of any type of popular music, not just pop by genre, but any type of popular music. I listen to a lot of older music. And the music that plays nowadays, the top 40, those kinds of songs, and especially the pop music or the club music, if you will, I don't like it, and yet I find myself singing it, like subconsciously. That's how powerful it is, and I'm aware of it, Mark.
Exactly. I find the same thing. I find myself with a song in my head, and I don't even like the song. And yet I find it ringing around my head for a couple of hours in the subconscious, again, before my conscious mind clicks into place. And I'm like, wait a minute, why the fuck am I singing this song in my head? I hate this song. And it happened to me this evening, actually. Even just a phrase can trigger a song that you've heard a million times in your head. So I looked at a name on a sheet of paper tonight, and the last name was Torn. And then about half an hour later, I became consciously aware that I had the song Torn by Natalie Imbruglia in my head, which is a hit from about 20 years ago from this Australian soap star turned singer. She had this big song called Torn. And just through seeing this person's name on a bit of paper, it triggered memories of that song. So it's absolutely a thing in terms of how this stuff can take root in your subconscious mind. And they know this, of course, which is why they put all the subliminals into things like the Super Bowl halftime show and the Grammys and the MTV VMAs. They put subliminals onto record sleeves and in promotional photos. They do predictive programming the whole time in movies and TV shows and music videos. They know how all this stuff works. They're master students of these dark arts.
These are psychological operations, and as you said, military intelligence, Central Intelligence Agency have all been involved. Major universities have been involved. You look at the LSD, you look at the hippie movement, free love, as you mentioned, with Laurel Canyon. All of this is highly, highly orchestrated. That doesn't mean that the band down the road that your friend plays in is some type of mind control experiment, but it does mean that a lot of the big names are no doubt, and I'd suggest whether they're aware of it or not, being used to carry out these agendas.
Yes. And, these controllers, they very much understand the way the human psyche works. So this is something you'll hear Mark Passio talk about. We mentioned him off air earlier. He talks about his days in the dark occult. It's no great secret that he was a part of groups like the Church of Satan and, these different satanic groups that he was a part of in his youth. And so he gives first-hand accounts of having had conversations with these sick psychopaths and the way they openly speak of their understanding of how the human psyche works and how that interacts with the rest of the nature of this reality, human consciousness, in accordance with the true nature of this reality in which we find ourselves. And so it's an occult science that they understand and apply. I start many of my public talks also with a famous quote from Edward Bernays, the double nephew of Sigmund Freud. who was a master propagandist and is known as the father of public relations. He's the guy that basically invented the concept of companies and organizations having this public front for themselves in training the public in terms of how to think about this organization when they hear its name. So the quote that I use is the opening page of his work Propaganda, simply called that, from 1928. I'm paraphrasing. I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but he says something along the lines of, our tastes are formed, our belief systems are shaped, our minds are molded largely by men whose names we've never heard. So he was definitely in a position to understand how that dynamic works. He was quite a piece of work, Bernays. He got into many different projects during his 103 years. I guess they didn't have fluoride and chemtrails and 5G back in those days, so you could actually live to 103 years of age. But, among the various things that he was used for, he coerced the American public to basically support military intervention in both World War I and World War II. He was called upon to use psychological techniques to, persuade the general populace that America had to go in to help its allies in both those wars. He was used to popularize the habit of Americans eating bacon and eggs for breakfast, believe it or not. He was hired by a meat manufacturer. They wanted to increase their sales, and they consulted him and said, how can we shift more bacon, basically? And so he had this habit of allying himself with people that were perceived to be professionals, like doctors and dentists, people that the public would trust by way of their perceived authority. You stick doctor in front of somebody's name, and most people are going to pay attention to anything they say and stick some letters after their name.
I might just change my name to Doctor, and then
it would certainly help. Yeah. But don't call yourself Sir or Lord, because people will get the wrong idea there, particularly in the UK.
Yes.
So anyway, this company hired him, and he allied himself with a bunch of doctors, and he got these doctors to put out a document saying, we think the best way for Americans to start the day is on a diet of bacon and eggs, because they get all the protein and nutrition they need and charge themselves up ready for a full day of work. And that was really successful. It increased the sales that this company had hired him for. He was also apparently the guy that saw to it that fluoride was put into the general water supply as a byproduct of the aluminium, or aluminum, as Americans would say, manufacturing industry. It was this sort of toxic, poisonous byproduct, and they didn't really know what to do with it. And he came up with this idea of linking with a bunch of dentists and getting them to say, we think that sodium fluoride is really good for cavities and tooth decay, and therefore you should have it in the water supply and stick it in toothpaste. So this guy really was successful at harnessing these public ideas and twisting belief systems according to, where his employers wanted him to go. And I think his blueprints and his templates and his ways of mastering the human psyche have been used by the controllers ever since. We see so many playouts of it, not least in the entertainment industry.
Mark, I really don't have anything to add to that except to just say that I 100% agree, and it's very rare am I left speechless, but you kind of explained it in a way that I would explain it if I could speak that well. Mark Devlin is Mark Devlin is our guest this evening here on The Secret Teachings. Our website is www.thesecretteachings.info, and I'm being serious about that. Mark Devlin just summed it up very, very well. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation. My email is rdgable@yahoo.com. That's rdgable@yahoo.com. Mark Devlin's website is www.markdevlin.co.uk. And you can find his information linked up on our website, also under the guest page. Musical Truth and Musical Truth Volume 2 are the books. We'll be right back.
If you enjoy the Secret Teachings radio broadcast, all the time and effort we put into production, research, and hosting, and our unwillingness to sell our souls for profit or fame, visit our website at www.thesecretteachings.info and get yourself a t-shirt, coffee mug, and Ryan's book, Occult Arcana, which he will autograph for you, and subscribe for unlimited downloads and streams of all our past broadcasts. Every yearly subscriber will also receive a digital copy of that book free. So visit www.thesecretteachings.info and support a show that has been banned from countless networks and conferences for honestly expressing what goes on behind the scenes. That's www.thesecretteachings.info for books, shirts, and subscriptions.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7 with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Hey, Fringe FM listeners, did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or no Wi-Fi available, you can still listen to every minute of the Fringe FM by calling 701-719-3971. No smartphone app or internet needed. Saves your data plan and no extra cost if you have unlimited minutes. Call 701-719-3971. That's 701-719-3971. Listen to the Fringe FM on any phone, anytime, anywhere.
As we move to expand and grow the Secret Teachings radio show and the website, thesecretteachings.info, we need your support. Not only are we brazenly blunt and talk about scary subjects, the point of the show is not fear for ratings. It is about empowering you, the listener. If you feel you learn or take anything away from the show, please consider donating a few dollars a month to support what we're doing here at The Secret Teachings. Visit our website and click the PayPal donation link at the top of the page. That's www.thesecretteachings.info. Again, www.thesecretteachings.info.
This is David Icke from davidicke.com, author of The Phantom Self and The Perception Deception, and you are listening to The Secret Teachings with Ryan Gable.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for the great work that you guys are doing. Phenomenal show, for phenomenal interview, phenomenal questions, and I'd be willing to come back at any time and explore other topics for discussion. So thank you for having me on today. Hi, everyone. This is Mark Passio from WhatOnEarthIsHappening.com, and you're listening to The Secret Teachings with Ryan Gable.
We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. Edward Bernays. I'm Ryan Gable, and you are listening to the Secret Teachings radio broadcast. Our guest this evening, Mark Devlin, UK-based club and radio DJ, music journalist, and author. His books, Musical Truth and Musical Truth Volume Number 2. His website, www.mark.devlin.co.uk. Mark and I have been talking about mind control. We've been talking about the entertainment industry. I think we've gone through a very generalized introduction to the subject, Mark, But I want to know what got you interested, what intrigued you, what piqued your interest in this subject, and how did you start researching all of this?
Okay, well, let me just say that those two idents you had there, David Icke and Mark Passio, that's a great thing for a show like this. That's like the new artist IDs that I used to have on my radio shows. So I used to be basically a black music DJ, hip hop and R&B and urban styles of music. And I would be really impressed if an artist like Nas or Big Daddy Kane or Busta Rhymes or somebody like that would do an ident saying, hey, you're listening to Mark Devlin on such and such a show. And now it seems to be these truth researchers that are the ones you get excited about getting IDs from. So that's an indication of how my life has changed completely. So here I am doing shows like this, putting out books, doing talks, unleashing information of this nature. And I never imagined that my life was going to come to this. If you told me 10 years ago that I'd be doing this now with my life, I'd have said, you're smoking crack and you don't know what you're talking about. But here I am, and it has come to this. And I don't really do much DJing anymore. Just before I came on the air with you, actually, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who, like me, has been a career DJ for many years, and he played similar styles of music to me. And he was saying that he just doesn't do it anymore. He's given it up, which I didn't know until I'd spoken to him this time. And I said, oh, why did you decide to give it up? He said, I just can't do it anymore. I just can't play the music. And I just can't deal with the people, with the attitudes of kids that come up to you in the DJ booth and they're just rude to you. They've got nothing but contempt. There's zero respect for what you do. They don't see you as any kind of artist or performer. They just see you as a human jukebox, and they hold up their smartphones with instructions of what they want you to play right now. They think you're there to fulfill their whims because they're used to this instant gratification that we have in society now, where everything is available at the touch of a button or the swipe of a screen, and everyone's got an attention span of about 15 seconds before they want to move on to the next thing. So I'm digressing a bit here, but that's what what used to be art form of DJing has now been relegated to. And that's why guys like me and my friend there just can't do it anymore. So I took several steps back from the DJing game a few years ago, probably about 5 or 6 years ago. It wasn't that difficult to do because the music that I was associated with was just getting worse and worse with every passing year. It was getting more and more debased, more and more degraded, more and more toxic, more and more satanic. As I dug more into this nature of research, I could see that that music is actually harmful in terms of some of the stuff that's going into it, the sound frequencies, the lyrical content, all the imagery surrounding the prominent artists. So I just didn't want to be a part of that anymore. What got me started in this whole thing was round about 2007, 2008, I would say. I started noticing that society was changing in a big way. I noticed the slow creep of technology that was coming in, where everything was getting digital, electronic ways of doing things were replacing what used to be the case. And I found that a little unsettling. I wasn't entirely comfortable with it. I'm not someone that's ever been impressed with technology. I've always been quite suspicious of it. I noticed the music changing as well. 2008, I think, was an all-time low in terms of so-called hip-hop and R&B music. That's when you had this merger of electronic dance music with the so-called urban styles of the time. And you had DJ producers like David Guetta and Will.i.am of the Black Eyed Peas and Calvin Harris and all these guys doing records with R&B singers like Kelly Rowland and Akon and Flo Rida and Pitbull and all these jokers, and just creating this mishmash, hodgepodge hybrid of these different styles of music. And I thought, this is not good. What's going on here? So that kind of sparked a certain suspicion in my mind. I would say that all is not great in the world, and maybe this requires a bit more looking into. And by 2010, the books of David Icke had come onto my radar, and I'd absorbed a couple of those, and it made sense of so much and actually answered many of the questions that I'd previously had. And I found I was less confused about the world now that I understood that it's not run by the people that we're told it is. And then you come to understand, of course, that this filters down to every aspect of our daily human experience. The world of politics, the world of big business, academia, science, the medical industry, the banking industry, and of course entertainment. And you come to realize that if you go far enough up the pyramid of power in all these different walks of life, it's the same groups and networks of occult practitioners, because that's what they are when you really get down to it. They're employing occult belief systems and a dark religion that they adhere to, and they're controlling all these different walks of life from the top down. So, as I say, that was about 2010, and everything just suddenly started to make sense to me. And I realized that I needed to dig more into how this dynamic plays out in the entertainment industry, and specifically in the music industry, of which I'd been a part. And of course, you fall down so many different rabbit holes, and you realize that this whole thing goes way, way, way deeper than you could ever have imagined. And you pursue one line of research and you find yourself branching off in 5 or 6 different directions.
Yes, you
and
do.
Then each of those 5 or 6 different directions branches off into others. And you find that at any given time, you've got 15 windows open on your laptop where you're skirting between sites to try and garner all this information. And that's what it's been like for me. With every passing year, I've just gone deeper and deeper into it all, and I've discovered more and more nefarious stuff. And I reached a point in 2014 where I realized that I had to put a book out to bring together everything I'd come to comprehend up to that point. Really, because in the first instance, I considered it a responsibility and an obligation that I had to truth. So I'd come to these realizations, and I realized it's not enough to just absorb all this information into yourself and increase your own personal knowledge without giving other people an opportunity to understand what you've come to understand. And then secondly, it was just looking around at the fact that really nobody else is doing this, particularly in the UK. I just didn't see anyone else putting this type of information out, and I considered that it's a vacancy that needed to be filled, and I was the man for the job, somewhat begrudgingly. I didn't entirely relish the prospect of having to put this information out, but I considered that I had to do it. And the further I've gone down this path, I've just come to accept that this is what I incarnated into this reality to do. It's become clearer with every passing year that the reason why I had the grounding in the music industry that I had, the reason why I put in all those years of work, of getting familiar with these music genres, of being someone that was part of the machinery of that industry and keeping it all ticking along. And the reason why I then had to take on these understandings of the true nature of this reality and what's really going on here is so that I could be someone that could put this work out into the world. And I now know that I'm on the path that I've always needed to be on. That's a sobering realization to come to in the first instance.
Powerful.
Yeah. But
I've had the exact same revelation.
When you're where you need to be, you know it. And that's where I'm at now.
You mentioned something about attention spans, and I looked into a study that Microsoft conducted back in 2015, and they showed that, according to their statistics and their quote-unquote study, that the average human attention span in 2000 was 12 seconds, but by 2013 it was only 8 seconds. And since then, in additional studies not conducted by Microsoft, we've seen the attention span decrease or stay about the same. 8 seconds is actually less than a goldfish. Now, we've also seen a lowering of IQ, about 14 points over the last 100 years on average. That was an Associated Press article several years ago. So generally speaking, we have a drop in IQ, lower IQs overall, and we have shorter attention spans. And that is contributed to, in large part, by technological, mechanical means, and it's also contributed to by entertainment. And we are so entertained that, as we talked about in the first segment, most of us don't necessarily think at all. We move from one form of entertainment to the other, one distraction to the other, whether it's work, and then a movie, and then a TV show, and then a video game, and in between we're on our phones, and we don't really take that much time to sit and to actually think. And so other people that have agendas are doing most of our thinking for us. And one of the things that I noticed, Mark, in music, especially in music. I was in Las Vegas about 6 months ago, and I was in the Luxor Hotel, the Big Pyramid, and I was checking into the hotel, and they have this big screen up where they were playing music videos. And I've never seen the music video for Justin Timberlake's Bringing Sexy Back, but I was literally mesmerized by this video. I found it difficult to look away from it, and I couldn't really consciously pull myself. I just kept looking at it, and I kept listening to it, and I don't like that song. I don't like Justin Timberlake, but it was literally mesmerizing. It's literally fascinating. I mean, these are old magical concepts which are applied today by these black magic practitioners, I'll call them, in the entertainment industry. And so on that subject, when I listen to music, some of the music we hear nowadays is literally like a chanting. It's this powerful chanting of the same, not just the same line, but in some cases the same word. Or we hear things like this, and this is where I kind of want to direct it to pass it on to you. I hear a lot of music now where, regardless of where it comes from, but it's mostly pop, there really aren't even words used. It's just like, whoa, 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 whoa,
yeah.
And that's the song. I mean, that is taking this, in my opinion, to a different level where we're not even hearing a word, a statement, a story being told. We're just hearing a chant. I mean, that is very powerful.
Right. Yeah, I've DJ'd in the Luxor, actually. Many years ago, I played a gig there. It's only about 5 people there, sadly. But
the rest were gambling?
It was an experience. Yeah, so what you just said there brings a couple of things to mind about lowered attention spans and lower IQ. I do relate a story in my current book about what I've noticed in terms of dance floor reactions to songs over the years as a DJ. So many years ago, when I first started out, about 25 years ago, first of all, people used to respect DJs then, by the way. They would take the view that a DJ is a professional that knows what he's doing. That's why he's there behind the booth and you're not. And you can trust him to do a responsible job of taking you on a musical journey and playing what needs to be played and keeping you entertained, keeping the dance floor filled. Then we fast forward to the situation we've got now, which I alluded to earlier, where people think you're just there for their instant gratification and to fulfill their every whim. But something else I've noticed is, back in the day, 25 years ago, you could put on a record, and as long as it was a solid tune and you'd done a good job of judging what to play at that particular point, you could hold the dance floor for a good 3, 4, 5 minutes. You take that forward to present day. Now, when you bring in a tune, the crowd, mainly young people that listen to these urban forms of music, it applies pretty much to this scene, but people will whoop and cheer when they hear the opening bars of a song because they recognize it. So you get that good reaction, but you can notice that after about 30 seconds, 45 seconds max, they're already bored. So you'll see, energetic dancing for the first 10 or 15 seconds. Then people start to get bored. And you can see it on their faces. You can see it in their body language. People start to take out their phones and check their messages. And so DJ instinct kicks in. You think, I need to drop the next tune. So you bring in the next tune. You get whoops and cheers again. You get 20 seconds of energetic dancing. And then you can see that it's fallen off again. And this has resulted in a new generation of young DJs. And I use the term loosely because they're all playing off laptops now and using auto sync functions that mixes the bloody tunes for them. But DJs are changing the tune every 40 to 60 seconds because that's the only way you can keep the crowd entertained. The other thing I wanted to mention is I've included a quote in my current book and in some of my talks from a guy called Paul Joseph Watson. He's affiliated with InfoWars. I'm not really down with InfoWars, and I don't particularly like this guy and most of his work. But he did absolutely nail it when he did an analysis of a study that had been done recently by scientists in Spain that had conducted an analysis into pop songs and what goes into their makeup. So I have included some quotes from Paul Joseph Watson because I think on this one particular occasion, though I'm not down with, other stuff that he does, he absolutely cracks it. So let me just read part of this, if I may. He said in his YouTube video, songs are sounding dumber and more repetitive because the dwindling attention span of the listener demands more hooks. So whereas decades ago you only had to write in one hook to get a hit, now there has to be a hook in the intro, the verse, the bridge, and the chorus, because a radio listener will change the station on average every 7 seconds unless they get this continual brain stimulation from a recurring hook. And then he just talks about the algorithms that are going into predicting what is going to make a catchy song that is going to sound good on the radio and is going to shift units. You know, it's all done by AI and computer systems and stuff. So that's what the music industry has been degraded to. They've really done a number on the generation known as the millennials, those born around the turn of the millennium, that are coming to age round about now. They must really hate this group because they're throwing everything they've got at them. They're just degrading and debasing their spirituality and their humanity with all this technology, with all this toxic culture that we've got. I really feel for young people actually in these times, because if the music that you hear being pumped out of the radio and coming out of clubs now is all they've got to look back on in years to come to remember their youth and get nostalgic about their formative years, then it's a pretty tragic state of affairs.
It absolutely is, and we find that not just in music, but we also find that in news. We find that in movies. We find that in television. We find that in kids' shows specifically, from my experience. And I find that regardless of what we are directing our attention towards, as we said earlier in the broadcast, it's so incredibly important. That question that's always asked, well, what do we do about it? It's just so evil. It's just so dark. It's just so negative. Well, it's not negative to address these things. It's negative to address them and then ignore them. It's positive to address them and be consciously aware of what's happening so that we can override the direct or indirect forms of programming. And
right.
It's not just the subliminals, I don't think, and it's not just the agendas that are being directed per se, but specifically and technically and scientifically, you talk about sound frequencies and the tuning of music and how important that is. Could you speak on that?
Yeah, well, I alluded earlier to the fact that when I listen to certain records now, I sense something evil. I'm actually going to use the word evil in the sound frequencies. So I'm talking about what passes for hip hop. You got this genre of hip hop known as trap music, which is glorifying criminal lifestyles, basically. And the lyrics are just very spiritually debased. It's basically the same old subject matter every time, talking about selling drugs.
It prepares the youth for prison.
Well, yeah, there is that. The lyrics talk about pushing drugs, pimping hoes, being up in the club, throwing wads of cash up in the air in the strip club, buying
rain.
champagne, gold rims, gold chains, having the latest technology, having the latest iPhone, and just gangbanging and partying and drinking lean, which is this mixture of cough syrup and paracetamol, codeine, and all these different things. There's this trend within rap music now where many of these completely toxic artists are glorifying this stuff called lean, and loads of people have been dying from it. There was a rapper by the name of Mac Miller who died just the other week at the age of 20-something, 28 or something, and his death was put down to his habit of drinking this bloody concoction that is now glorified through the music. There's something going into the bass lines, the production of these records that come out of trap and different forms of hip hop. I'd refer to it as demonic sonics because it actually makes me feel uneasy and panicky when I hear it. I've made the comment on several occasions that if I'm unfortunate enough to be in the vicinity of one of these records coming on the radio or coming on in a venue or whatever, I have to get the hell out of there because I just can't stand to be around this stuff. It doesn't seem to bother young people because you'll get a club full of 18, 20-year-olds that will spend the entire night listening to this stuff and seemingly loving it because this is the soundtrack of their youth. But because I'm of the next generation, I'm old enough to remember better times, better days, better music, better sound frequencies, the stuff affects me. And many other people of my generation say the same thing. So there's something going into it. Sound can be weaponized and frequently is. It's a military grade tactic to use sound as a weapon. There's many examples of this having been done for dispersal of large crowds, for instance. They can play a frequency, a sound tone, and it can make people in a crowd feel physically unwell, nauseous, and they just want to get the hell out of there. They can no longer function because of this stuff, and often it's inaudible. It happens on a frequency where you can't even hear it. You're not consciously aware of it, but it's having an effect. So all this stuff could be getting loaded into the sound frequencies of this music we now have, particularly as it's all digital and electronic in nature. This brings us back to electronic dance music, which similarly, a lot of records coming out of those genres make me feel pretty unwell as well. And so if you're someone with nefarious aims, who doesn't necessarily have the upliftment of all humanity as your number one priority, and you understand the science of sound and how it can be employed, you could be putting all kinds of stuff into these recordings. So in the same way that when you take a full frequency WAV form of a piece of audio, where everything is there, all the treble, all the mid, all the bass is there, and in order to get the file size down to manageable proportions in the form of an MP3 that can be sent over the internet or downloaded or loaded onto an iPod or whatever, there's this process that takes place where the system will strip away all these sound frequencies and all these different parts of the recording which are imperceptible to the human ear. And they get rid of all these parts of the file in order to trim the size down. But the listener who then gets to hear the MP3 is not aware of what's been left out of the recording. It still sounds the same to them, and yet a whole load of information is missing. So if things can work that way around and you can strip stuff out without anyone noticing, the opposite is going to be true. You can strip stuff into a recording without anyone being aware that it's there. And I'm convinced that this is going on all the time. We then get into the 432 versus 440 hertz standard tuning pitch, which is a real hot potato in this area of research. I get asked about this all the time. The standard international tuning pitch currently and for the past several decades has been A equals 440 hertz, where the A note in a musical instrument when it's being tuned or a piece of music that's being recorded is set to 440 hertz. What used to be the case is that 432 was the international standard, and many musicologists and sound scholars and audio engineers that you speak to will tell you that 432 is a natural harmonic frequency that syncs very well with human brain waves and human body rhythms and basically makes you feel at ease and is very pleasing to the human condition, whereas 440 in contrast is anything but. It creates discordance and dissonance and unease in a listener being exposed to this stuff, although they're not consciously aware of why it is. So it speaks volumes that 440 has been adopted as the standard, all over the world. It was reportedly introduced by those nice people at the Rockefeller Foundation at the tail end of the Second World War after an earlier attempt to get it established as the standard back in 1917. But most music that people now listen to on the radio or when they go and stream a piece of music or buy a CD or whatever will have been mastered to 440 hertz, and that is having a discordant effect on you without you being aware of it in any way.
Mark Devlin is our guest this evening. His website, www.markdevlin.co.uk. Our website, www.thesecretteachings.info. Mark, when we come back from break, I want to get into some of the specifics of your books, Musical Truth and Volume 2 of Musical Truth. I know you've spoken about some of it already on the broadcast, but I want to give you the opportunity. If I was being interviewed, I'd like to be given a platform to talk about some specifics in my book, so I want to give that opportunity to you when we come back from break. My email is rdgable@yahoo.com. That's rdgable@yahoo.com. Again, Mark Devlin, our guest this evening, www.markdevlin.co.uk. I like that, demonic sonic. I like that too. We'll be right back. If you enjoyed the Secret Teachings radio broadcast and appreciate the time and effort we put into production, researching, and hosting, and our unwillingness to compromise to sell our souls for profit or fame, then visit our website at www.thesecretteachings.info and get yourself a t-shirt, coffee mug, my book Occult Arcana, which I will autograph for you, and subscribe for unlimited downloads and streams of all of our past broadcasts. Every yearly subscriber will also receive a digital copy of that book for free. So visit www.thesecretteachings.info and support a show that has been banned from countless conferences and networks for honestly expressing what goes on behind the scenes. That's www.thesecretteachings.info for books, t-shirts, and subscriptions. And don't forget to catch the live show Monday through Friday, 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. Pacific Standard Time.
The truth is out there.
There's something out here.
And so are we. KTOK Digital Broadcasting, The Fringe FM.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7 with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Hey, Fringe FM listeners, did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or no Wi-Fi available, you can still listen to every minute of the Fringe FM by calling 701-719-3971. No smartphone app or internet needed. Saves your data plan and no extra cost if you have unlimited minutes. Call 701-719-3971. That's 701-719-3971. Listen to the Fringe FM on any phone, anytime, anywhere.
As we move to expand and grow the Secret Teachings radio show and the website, thesecretteachings.info, we need your support. Not only are we brazenly blunt and talk about scary subjects, the point of the show is not fear for ratings. It is about empowering you, the listener. If you feel you learn or take anything away from the show, please consider donating a few dollars a month to support what we're doing here at The Secret Teachings. Visit our website and click the PayPal donation link at the top of the page. That's www.thesecretteachings.info. Again, www.thesecretteachings.info.
Hello, I'm Sandra Fecht, counselor in trauma and satanic ritual abuse. You can reach me at Sandra Fecht, F as in Frank, ECHT.com. You're listening to Ryan Gable's The Secret Teachings.
This is Lon Milo Duquette, author of Key to Solomon's Key, and you're listening to The Secret Teachings.
I'm Ryan Gable, and you are listening to The Secret Teachings. To entertain is to give our attention or consideration to something. And where energy flows, that's where attention goes. Movies, television programming, books, news, music videos. There's an underlying thread, an underlying theme of mind control and manipulation. It's not necessarily the case that every band and every person who sings karaoke is involved in some massive conspiracy. That's far too specific and far too even generalized. But to dismiss that there's any pattern within the subject matter that we're talking about this evening with Mark Devlin is to likewise be too specific and too generalized. Objectively following this information will allow us to find whatever it is that the truth might be by connecting the dots between seemingly unconnected people, places, and events, as I say to end every broadcast, and that's what makes the world that we live in feel as if, and I think it actually does, help us to have a better understanding, and it makes things a lot easier to comprehend. Connecting the dots between seemingly unconnected people, places, and events, and the world that seems complex will begin to make sense. Mark Devlin, as I said, is our guest this evening. His website, www.markdevlin.co.uk. His information is linked up on our website as well under our guest page. There's a photograph, a biography, and links to his website, his books, Musical Truth, and his Volume 2 of Musical Truth. You can find those on his website. Now, Mark, I wanted to ask you a question about music before we move on to kind of breaking down and analyzing your books, and that is on the subject of tuning and frequency, and on the subject of the types of music that seem to be being made now where it's not really even music. It's repetitive. It's mesmerizing. It's fascinating. It's a form of magic, a form of mind control. Have you done any research into the subject of reverse speech? I know some people want to know that.
Yeah, I have. And I meant to just pick up on your earlier comment, actually, when you were talking about all these banal, mind-numbing hooks that are going into these pop songs now. There's a researcher out there, I forget the guy's name, but he's coined the term the millennial whoop. Have you heard of that one?
I have not heard of the millennial whoop, no.
Okay, well, it's exactly what you said. It's all these just mind-numbing, vacuous hook lines and choruses that are going into these pop songs. It's all whoa, whoa, way, way, and all this stuff where there's not even any lyrics. So he's termed it the millennial whoop, and this guy's done much research into the huge number of pop songs now that just employ this in the absence of any kind of meaningful lyrics. If people do a Google search for millennial whoop, I'm sure they'll find videos about that. And I've also noticed a bunch of pop songs now are using sort of sound frequencies in their bass lines and stuff, which sound, to me, otherworldly. It sounds as if there's something really dark going on, like there's some sort of entity that's trying to break through the record through the sound frequencies. That's my interpretation of it anyway. The only one I can bring to mind straight away is Rudimentals These Days. There's a part of the hook where it's all kind of sound manipulation and electronic frequencies and stuff, and there's many songs like it, which has become a trend, I've noticed, in recent times. And I do have to wonder if there's some sort of occult practice going on there. I do want to get some more into this if that's okay as we progress, because I've got a few other observations there. But remind me what the question was, because I've just gone off track there.
No, it's totally fine. I understand, and we can get into all of that as we continue with the interview this evening here on The Secret Teachings. The question was about reverse speech in music.
Yes. I do that sometimes. I go off at different tangents.
I do too. I do too. I understand. And there's so much information. There's so much you want to say.
Exactly. Get both feet stuck down a rabbit hole. So reverse speech, yeah, it's certainly a thing, it would seem. There is this guy in Australia by the name of David Oates who has pioneered what he refers to as reverse speech therapy. And he's a guy who, so the story goes, in 1983 accidentally dropped a dictation tape machine into his toilet. And when he took it out again and tried to get it to work, it would only play backwards. And he says that playing all this gobbledygook nonsense on the tape, he thought he could detect certain words and phrases that were coming through in the reverse speech. And so he looked some more into it and started recording friends speaking about whatever and just putting it on tape and then reversing the tape. And he noticed that certain words and phrases were coming through the reverse speech that seemed to indicate what was going on with that particular person and had some relevance to where they were at in life and their mindset and their thought patterns and things like that. So he really threw himself into this whole thing, and he's established this whole area of practice which is supposed to have therapeutic benefits. There's also a guy called John Kelly in Canada that's got an operation called yourinnervoice.com. And these people get clients in, and it's like going to see a psychiatrist. They get you to talk at length about whatever. It doesn't really matter what you talk about. It's just nonsense. And they record the whole thing, play the tape backwards, and supposedly they can determine what is really on that person's mind. And the idea is that the subconscious mind, we're back to that again, doesn't need to hear information in a linear front to back pattern in order for it to make sense. It can intuit information in any form. It's the same thing as scientists tell us that when an image, something that we're looking at, hits our cornea, it appears upside down. And then the brain works to flip the image around so that it's processed the right way up. That's what I've been told by people that research this field. You know, you see these films where you have a photographer with an old style camera and they've got a cloth over their head and they stick their head underneath it and they look at what's in the camera lens and the image is upside down. And then when they take the picture, it's the right way up. It's the same concept going on there. So it's back to front inversion. And this seems to be something that is inherent within this nature of reality in which we find ourselves, this realm of existence. So this seems to have been understood by occultists, not least Aleister Crowley. In his Book of Magic, he's talking about training adepts in these different doctrines. And he's talking about in training them to speak backwards and to be able to listen to phonograph records backwards. There's a section of that work where he says, let the adept train himself to listen to phonograph records in reverse. And they also learn how to walk backwards and all kinds of crazy stuff. Michael Jackson's moonwalk, anyone? So this brings in the whole phenomenon of backmasking in popular music records, which has been subject to scrutiny for several decades. There seem to be different aspects of what goes on. So first of all, there's artists who deliberately put messages into their music backwards in full knowledge of what they're doing as a prank, to be mischievous, to be creative. The Beatles did a lot of this. John Lennon, in one of his interviews, said, you know, our music is full of subliminal messages. We used to use backmasking the whole time. Prince used that as well in some of his records. But there does seem to be an aspect of this where backmasked messages creep into a recording without the full knowledge, without the conscious will of the music creator. And probably the best example I can give, which I've given many times, is Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. This has been endlessly analyzed. And there's a section in the middle of the record where if you play it in reverse, you're supposed to get all kinds of messages like references to Satan. I forget exactly what the phrase is supposed to say, but it's, you know, basically embracing and glorifying Satan. And so a lot of skeptics will write that off and they will say, oh, you just hear anything you want to hear. And if you set out to hear some occult message in a piece of music, when you play it backwards, you're going to make yourself hear it. But I really think it's a thing because there's many, many different examples of this. And if it really is the case that our subconscious minds can encode our true thoughts and our true emotions and the spiritual state that we're in into speech without us being aware of it, then the same must be true of musicians when they're putting this stuff into their work and expressing themselves that way. We've heard many times that musicians, because they're very creative individuals and they open themselves up to all kinds of artistic influences, are rife for manipulation by spirits or entities that reside beyond this physical realm, and that they are the kinds of individuals that these entities latch themselves onto, unbeknown to them in most cases, and they kind of bring them through and channel them. Certainly you hear many musicians talking about how when they've sat down to write a song, the lyrics just come to them. They don't know where it came from. They just start writing, and before they know it, they've got all these lyrics in place. Robert Plant has actually made comments like that about that song Stairway to Heaven. He said he didn't know where it came from. It just sort of channeled through him. Many other artists have spoken of this. Eminem has spoken about it. Jay-Z spoken about it. Elton John, David Bowie, many, many musicians. So these seem to be people that are able to be contacted in this way. And actually the very word music is derived from the Muses, which were these non-human sort of entities, spirit entities that the ancient Greeks and ancient societies spoke about, ancient cultures, where they could get in touch with them and they would channel themselves through creative individuals like poets and actors and musicians and performers of different types. So when it comes to backmasking, if the likes of David Oates are to be believed, and if there really is something to this science, it would give an explanation as to why there's so many seemingly satanic messages in so many of these recordings when they're played backwards, because the music industry is satanic at the core of it. I'm talking about the corporate industry, the big record labels, the big acts, the household names that everyone's heard of. I'm not talking about every single person that picks up a guitar or sits in front of a piano being evil and channeling bad stuff through their music. I'm just talking about the key players who are the assets and the foot soldiers of the occult practitioners that preside over these industries. When you get to this level, everything is very dark and very satanic, and adhering to these different occult agendas that these controllers have. So I would say absolutely it's a thing, and it's not to be discounted.
Mark, I wanted to ask you, in your book, Musical Truth, you have a very small section, 2 pages, called A 3 a.m. Wake Up. Could you explain to me very briefly what that is? And then if it is what I think it is, I have a comment before you go any further.
Right. Now, this is the story from Prague in the Czech Republic, right? Is that the one you're referring to?
I believe so. It starts off a 3 a.m. wake up. And
well, actually, there are 2 anecdotes that I can relate, because they both apply to 3 a.m. So I'll give you the quick version of both of these anecdotes. So very early on in my career, my first job was at a radio station in my hometown of Oxford, and this was called Fox FM, and I'm greatly amused now to find that in gematria, Fox equates to 666 in numerology, which is a nice little twist to the story. But I started out as, a T-boy and a dog's body in this radio station, just doing all these different jobs, and I would hang out there, and it became my second home because I really wanted to get into radio and didn't really have a life. So I just spent all my time living in this radio station. And there was this one time, it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I tried a little something. I'd heard on a television show that Madonna's Justify My Love, which had just come out at the time in 1990, is supposed to have a satanic message in it when you play it backwards. It's supposed to say, "Hear us, love us, Satan," at a particular point. And so this was in the era of reel-to-reel tapes before computers took over everything. And I thought to myself, as I was sat in this studio at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to try this, and see if I can spot it. So got the record on a reel of tape, played the tape backwards, and it absolutely chilled me to the bone, because it definitely sounded like that's what was coming through. And that record, even when you play it forwards, has a very demonic kind of feel to it, I would say. It's not right. There's something not right about that record. The only other person in the building at the time was the DJ that was on air. So I ran next door and I said, "You've got to come through and listen to this. This is crazy." So he came through to the next studio and I said, "Listen to this." Rewound the tape, played it back, and there was nothing on it. The tape was completely blank, and there's no rhyme or reason as to why that would be the case. So that's number one. That was my induction into the world of backmasked messages in music. The other 3 a.m. wake-up call that I relate in the book is a visit that my wife and myself made to this venue in Prague in the Czech Republic in, I think it's around 2003. I was there on a DJ trip. We were staying in this place, which wasn't really a hotel. It was like a restaurant. And then up above, they had these 2 rooms that they let out. And it was very classically, tastefully furnished, real old style. And we were staying in this one particular room. And so we went to sleep, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, we heard 3 knocks in rapid succession on the door. And we weren't expecting anyone, so we thought, what the hell is this? And we noticed at the time that the room had turned very, very cold, and there was a very strange atmosphere around. Just before we checked into the room, we noticed that there was a spiral staircase leading up to a sort of loft area above where we were staying. We thought, well, that's a bit strange. What's going on there? So after we'd heard these 3 knocks on the door, we could hear pacing around footsteps above us. And it was clear that there were people in this loft area above us. And then we heard a very low level chanting going on, vocal chanting. And we were thinking, we're not really up for this, not really signed up for this. So let's get out of here first thing in the morning, which we did. And so this venue was on a hillside, and we went up to investigate on the top of the hill in the morning. And we noticed that there was a massive pentagram that had been etched into the ground at the top of this hill where the venue was situated. And as we checked out of the venue in a hurry, we noticed that there were pictures all over the wall of what looked like classic depictions of hell, Dante's Inferno, and all these different images of demons and tortured souls and stuff. And
sure.
We thought, how did we miss that when we checked in? But looking back on it now, with what I've come to understand, what took place that night was a satanic ritual or a black mass. And this venue was obviously used for these things, hence the pentagram carved in the floor at the top. And I think it was assumed when we checked in there that we were there to be a part of this ritual, when we absolutely weren't. So the 3 knocks on the door were our invitation to take part. And this was about 3 o'clock in the morning, which is said to be the witching hour.
Yes.
And it's where this world, this apparently physical reality, is supposed to be the closest to the spirit world in terms of, the connections between the two. So those are my 2 3 a.m. stories.
I want to expand on that, so if you would just give me a moment, I want to share with you some research that I've done on that subject. And I just kind of came across it inadvertently. I didn't attempt to find this. It just kind of came to me. And as you said, the witching hour, 3 a.m., about 3 to 4 a.m. is when melatonin and pinoline and DMT, the production of which peak, and it puts people into a very deep sleep. And that is when the spirit, the spiritual world, the physical world, the line between the two becomes blurred. There's usually a higher rate of death and a higher rate of birth at those times, around that time, 3 to 4 a.m. And so that's the first thing I would like to say. And then I want to move on to music and movies. And I want to go over something really quick here that I noticed. And that is memes like Slender Man and internet challenges like the Blue Whale, which was a suicide challenge. There's also a new challenge called Momo, where people call this character and it prompts them to send really graphic images or disturbing images, or it prompts them to do certain things like cut themselves and send a picture of them cutting themselves or something along those lines. And what I noticed is that, let's look at the meme Slender Man, the Slender Man character. It was just an internet meme. It was just a character. And it manifested, it's now a movie, it's manifested where 2 girls tried to murder another girl. These were 12-year-olds. There was another case that didn't really make it into the news, but it was briefly mentioned when it first happened. I remember reading it. Another girl who had a strange... she had a strange robe or something on when her mom came home, just a little girl, and she had a knife in her hand and said she was going to kill her mom for Slender Man. And the thing about Slender Man is Slender Man manifests in the woods, which is a prominent location for sacred rituals, the sacred groves, as in the Bohemian Grove, if you will. And a lot of blood rituals, both of the white and black kind, were performed in woods because it's believed that fresh oxygen will help to amplify those elements in the blood. And so we find this theme, Mark, from Slender Man manifesting in the woods to Stranger Things, the television show, where the first time we see this creature that came from the other side in a portal that was located in the Department of Energy there in the town of Hawkins, Indiana, in the show, this Demogorgon or Demogorgon appears on a street called Mirkwood and chases the character through the woods. Justin Timberlake, you even have their timber as in trees, Timberlake, he performed his his new album, some of the songs from his new album at the Super Bowl this year. Halftime show, very, very powerful. Where our attention goes, that's where energy flows. Millions of people watch this. The name of his new album is called Man of the Woods. Of course, you have the girl in the ring coming out of the well in the woods. And you find this theme of the parasite, like in Stranger Things. You find the parasite in movies like, for kids, movies like Monsters Incorporated, where you have an energy department coming into our world as monsters, scaring children, bottling the fear, and feeding off of it like parasites, like vampires. And the creature in that, this crab-like creature, is very similar to, and you can just go through a long list of these, I'm not going to do it for time's sake, but very similar to the Ursula character in The Little Mermaid, very similar to the remote-viewed creatures. I had Harold Kautz on from Germany to talk about this from Morgellons. These little creatures that are in the body, they remote view them, they look like little spiders, little parasites. You also have the face hugger parasite from Alien. There's a video game called The Last of Us where you have something called the cordyceps, which is a fungus. It's a parasite that takes over the head. So I started to find all of this, Mark, the symbolism with the woods, and find that in movies and TV shows and music videos. And I came across, specifically for music, as I was looking at the Momo game, where you text this thing or it calls you, and it's very graphic and horrifying, and looking at like the Blue Whale Challenge and Slender Man and some of these other internet challenges. And I came across two things. I came across the 3 a.m. challenge. There's actually a challenge. Have you heard of that, the 3 a.m. challenge?
No, I haven't.
It's a social media challenge where you're supposed to do something at 3 o'clock in the morning, like call strangers, do prank calls, or try to contact God or a spirit, and do things to bring entities into our world, onto our plane of existence. So I found that, and I had never heard of
all
that
in the
before.
name of fun, right?
All in the name of fun. Yeah, it's just fun. It's just a movie. It's just a TV show, right? It's just music.
Yeah, of course, that's what it is.
And I remembered, because I grew up with a lot of hip hop, and I had listened to Eminem when I was younger. And of course, with Eminem, I'd like to talk to you about that in a little bit too. The multiple personalities, Slim Shady, Eminem, Marshall Mathers. And he released a song at 3 a.m. called 3 a.m. And the lyrics go like this: "There's no escaping, there's no place to hide. You scream, someone save me, but they don't pay no mind. Good night, goodbye. You're walking down the horror corridor. It's almost 4 a.m, and you're in a nightmare. It's horrible." And in that music video, he's singing "Possessed," white eyes in the woods, same type of symbolism. And so this 3 a.m., whether it's a challenge and the symbolism associated with the woods, the Momo challenge, and what Momo is the character with like these chicken legs. It's a distorted female with chicken legs and strange breasts. It's really, really bizarre. But the symbolism of it, not to get into too many details, the symbolism of it relates directly to medieval representations of demons. It relates to the Slavic folklore of the Baba Yaga. And even anatomists nowadays are suggesting that human beings can be upgraded, and we can be turned into a human being 2.0 through genetics, which would include chicken legs and include octopus eyes. That might sound crazy, which I think it is crazy, but this is not my suggestion. This is what's happening. So no matter if we look at anatomy, we look at genetics, we look at mythology, we look at internet memes, we look at TV, we look at movies, we look at music, we find this same theme. And all of it relates to what you're talking about. It relates to, and I don't like to use the word satanic for a lot of reasons, but it does relate to some satanic element where it's almost as if there's a force that is prompting the youth and prompting all of the people who pay attention, currency, energy like money, pay attention to these things to bring about the manifestation, the evocation, the conjuring of these entities and these spirits into our world. I digress. What do you think about all of that?
Well, I digress all the time. I don't have a whole lot to add to that. I think you've made some stunning observations there, and a lot of that is new to me, so I've absorbed everything you've said there. Just going back to, I mentioned that there were 3 knocks on the door when we were invited to take part in this ritual. That's how I interpret that. I was told a while back by an insider that the 3 knocks are a form of mind control trigger. And there's a record called Knock 3 Times by Dawn, which is a most unlikely act to be used in these circumstances. But this song, this person told me, is used as a trigger for people that have been mind control programmed in line with monarch programming and these different aspects of MK Ultra and satanic ritual abuse. The lyrics to that song include knock 3 times on the ceiling if you want me, twice on the pipe if the answer is no. There are other songs as well, which this person told me, when they're heard on the radio, act as a trigger for programming for subjects of, these schemes. One of them is Toto, Africa. Now, how many times do you hear that song on the radio? Anytime there's a sort of classic oldies station on, you're pretty much guaranteed
I've heard it
to hear
twice
Toto
this week.
by Africa.
Twice this week I've heard it.
There you go. And also the Eagles Hotel California, never off the radio. Many other songs as well. Laura Branigan's Gloria, apparently, is one as well. Steeped in mind control symbolism when you get into the video and that particular artist as well. There seems to be a very fine line between mind control and satanic ritual abuse, where you have dissociative identity disorder coming through. Trauma-based mind control causes the mind of an individual, often from childhood. They get these people very young. It's extremely sick. Many of these pop puppet artists will actually have been subject to this style of programming from early childhood. I think it's pretty much a done deal with Britney Spears. It's pretty clear that she was programmed from an early age. And then there's the likes of Miley Cyrus and so many others that you can throw into that mix as well. So they create these different personalities. That's where you get things like Nicki Minaj having all these different personas in interviews. One of them is known as Roman Zelensky, which is this entity that she says lives within her. And she supposedly exorcised that entity from within her at one of the Grammys shows. I think it was in 2014, where a Catholic priest came on stage and they perform an exorcism right there in front of the crowd.
That's fun.
At what is supposed to be a music show watched by kids. All just fluffy entertainment, right, folks? Nothing to worry about. So you've got all these artists that have these different personalities, and we can segue into Eminem and the whole Slim Shady thing here. But there seems to be a fine line between the different alter egos that are created through this horrific trauma that mind control victims go through and actual demonic possession, if people are prepared to accept that that's a thing, where a non-human entity can actually take possession of a human body if it's invited in. We're back to the concepts of free will and consent here, which is another big part of my work. I go into how everything that happens in this reality and even in the spiritual realms can only occur through free will and consent. Now, free will and consent can be coerced and manipulated and fabricated so that an individual is not entirely conscious of what it is they're getting themselves into. So they can be tricked into giving their consent to something, deceived. You can think of the whole birth certificate fraud and legal fiction and admiralty law here, which is a whole different subject area in itself. But consent and free will are everywhere. So when it comes to demonic possession or having these entities enter into somebody, there has to have been some level of invitation to that entity to come in. And I think that's what we're seeing with a lot of these supposed artistic statements, art forms, types of entertainment where you have individuals getting involved in occultic activity and rituals and things like that. So they're actually bringing through these entities as a result of this ritualistic activity, whether they realize they're doing it or not. But it's not the case that an entity can just jump into a body and take it over without being invited in some way. That's the point I'm trying to make here. So if you wanted to segue into the M&M business here, it might be a good point to do so.
I'd like to take a break and come back to that, but before I do, on the subject of free will, in the TV show Stranger Things, the main character, his name is Will, and through will, they're able to overcome this parasite demon from the upside-down world. The second thing is, I think you summed that up very, very nicely, and that is something that I've talked about for years here on The Secret Teachings. That's something that Clyde Lewis and I on Ground Zero have also talked about. And I broke that down by examining some music from both country and hip hop, and then a lot of pop music. Where you're familiar, I'm sure, with the Umbrella song, right?
Oh, Rihanna, yeah,
Rihanna,
absolutely.
Right? I noticed something, Mark, that in a lot of other songs that span various genres, there's a repeating of part of that Umbrella song where they say, "Stand under my umbrella, Ella, 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 Ella." And I find that in a lot of different music. And I wondered what that was. So I started doing a little research into it. And I broke down what the word umbrella means. And it relates to a covering. It relates to protection. It relates to a shadow. If you read into the Necronomicon, the Umbra is one of the gods of the spheres, which will impart to those who summon this demon fame, fortune, and for men specifically, women and sex. And I find that so appropriate relating to, as you were talking about, the debauchery and the depravity that is promoted by mainstream hip-hop today, that it just so happens to be, whether it's an H.P. Lovecraft story or, giving a different name to something that we might know under a completely different name throughout mythology or demonology, that these entities, directly related or indirectly related to the music, as far as my research shows, are related to fame. They are related to fortune. They're related to sexuality. They're related to the very things that are personified by the music industry, in the videos, in the music, by movies, and all forms of entertainment. I don't think that's a coincidence. And I think that on the subject of free will, I 100% agree with you, Mark. That's what we're seeing through these platforms. We're seeing the average person participate by singing along, having it stuck in their head, paying currency, money, currency, energy that you expend to obtain that money, that currency. You're paying attention and you're paying money to go watch that movie. You're paying for cable. You're paying to rent that movie. You're paying for Netflix. You're watching things, paying for it, paying attention. All of that energy goes into a collective, and I think that collective helps to literally and symbolically conjure and evoke these entities and these spirits that, for the musicians and for the actors and the actresses, whether they're aware or not, and some I think are directly aware and they do it intentionally, others are just, it's a byproduct of what they do. They're like marionettes, they're puppets. And also for the industry specifically, they know what they're doing. They use the masses of people, they use that energy to invoke and to evoke these characters, these entities, these demons, these spirits, whatever they might be.
Yeah. It's right there in the language, as you say, when you're paying attention. That's the currency that you're giving. And you also hear in entertainment phrases like capturing the imagination.
Yes.
And that's exactly what they're doing with Disney films and things like that. They'll use that phrase. The song Umbrella that we're talking about, Rihanna, that's also notable because it's got Jay-Z on it, and it introduces this alter ego of Jay-Z known as Rain Man.
Yes, I was going to bring that up. Yes, Rain Man, go ahead.
Yeah, so Jay-Z introduces himself. He says, Jay, Rain Man is back with Little Miss Sunshine, Rihanna, where you at? And then later on, he just talks about being Rain Man. Now, people think that's a reference to this movie, Rain Man, that came out in 1988 with Dustin Hoffman playing this idiot savant character with Tom Cruise in that movie also. But Jay-Z isn't the only rapper that has come out under the pseudonym of Rain Man. We also have Eminem. We're back to him.
Several times, yes.
Yeah, so he made a comment in an interview several years ago where he said, my name isn't going to be Slim Shady no more Eminem either. I don't even go by my government name, Marshall Mathers. If I do come back, you know what my new name going to be? Rain Man. And in a separate interview, Jay-Z has spoken about, I go into my Rain Man, I just start mumbling. I start channeling this stuff. I don't know where it's coming from. You just enter into it. So they appear to be alluding to some form of possession by this entity known as Rain Man, who would appear to be rather more than just Dustin Hoffman's character in that movie. And it's interesting that Umbrella, you mentioned there, Umbra, the word that appears in the Necronomicon, a fictional occult book of demonology by H.P. Lovecraft. So it's all about occult practices and inviting these entities in. And we have Jay-Z introducing this Rain Man concept on that record as well. So I think Umbrella is a very dark song. On the surface, it's all light and fluffy and poppy, but there's also stuff in the video there's a researcher called Lennon Honor that did some great analysis of that video. And there's this 1 split-second frame where Rihanna is inside a pyramid, go figure.
That's right.
And she's striking this pose that appears to be her bending her head down and stretching her arms out.
She's kind of covered she's covered in silver, isn't she? Like a silver goo.
Yeah, and she's getting sprayed with this silver stuff. It's all very strange. But in this one particular pose, if you examine it, you realize that in fact what you're looking at is the face of some beast-like entity, like the Baphomet. So it's got, where you think it's her arms being outstretched, it's actually the horns of this thing.
Yes.
And where you think it's her head bowing down, it's actually the snout. And so you realize that it's the face of some sort of hideous non-human entity. It's on screen for a split second. So to examine it, you've got to get a copy of the video on your computer and be very handy with the pause key so that you can grab that split second frame. Because otherwise, if you're watching it on the TV, it goes straight in your subliminal mind. And you don't even realize that it's there. It's classic subconscious programming, as we were saying earlier. So here it all is in a pop video, the target audience for which would be kids, young girls, basically of 7 to 13 years of age, I guess, would be the target demographic there. So isn't that charming to know that that's what our kids are absorbing on these MTV music channels and stuff?
Mark Devlin is our guest, and Mark, I think I just want to skip break. I'm going to pause for a moment here and let everyone know that you're listening to The Secret Teachings. I'm Ryan Gable. As I said, Mark Devlin is our guest this evening. This is one of the most fun and informative shows I think I've done in a long time with a guest. You can find Mark Devlin's information on our website, or you can go to his website at www.markdevlin.co.uk. His 2 books, Musical Truth and Musical Truth 2. Again, it's all linked up on our website at www.thesecretteachings.info. If you go to our website, you can find T-shirts to support this broadcast. You can find my book, Occult Arcana, where I break a lot of the symbolism down. It's kind of like a grimoire, actually. And then our subscription service. That's what really supports this show. So if you have the ability, you go to the website, subscribe. If you subscribe for 1 year, you get a free digital copy of my book, Occult Arcana. And whether you subscribe for the year or the month, you can download and stream unlimited episodes of this broadcast with great guests like Mark Devlin and timeless subjects. All of that at www.thesecretteachings.info. Now, Mark, we've really touched on some volatile subjects here, ones that really get my heart pumping, that make me excited, because it's very, very rare do I talk to somebody who can see these correlations. And so what I want to do is kind of go through some of the things we've brought up here from Eminem and going back to your book, and I'm going to give you a platform to kind of talk about anything else in that book as we move on through the remainder of the interview. And then, of course, Rain Man, as you mentioned, which I was looking at some notes that I had from a book that I wrote, looking at Rain Man when you said it, because I was about to bring it up. And I wanted to mention that Eminem actually had a song called Rain Man. And here's how the song goes. You can say it's coincidence. You can say that it's an anomaly. But when you find this in so many various genres of music, and you find this in so many different genres of people, personalities, it's not a coincidence. It's not an anomaly. It's a pattern. So here's how it goes. Eminem sings this: "'Cause I ain't got no legs or no brain. Nice to meet you. Hi, my name is. I forgot my name." And he says, "My aim was not to become what I became with this level of fame." There's the fame again, like the Umbra. "My soul is possessed by this devil. My new name is Rain Man." And I went through and found that in a bunch of different songs. There's a song by Jamie Foxx where he calls himself the Rain Man. There are other songs by Eminem, Old Time's Sake, Speak of the Devil, it's Attack of the Rain Man.
There's Gucci Mane and Lil Wayne,
yes,
who are two rappers that also have tracks called Rain Man. I mean, what are the chances that all these artists are just going to decide to call tracks by this name randomly if there's nothing to it?
Exactly, Mark, exactly. One other thing about Eminem is he actually did a song which I think sums up everything you've said, and I think sums up everything I've said about this demonic type possession, and that is a song called My Darling. Have you listened to that one?
Yeah, that's a sick one, isn't it? Deeply dark.
It's incredibly dark, and he's basically singing into a mirror, and he's looking in this mirror, which is very, very, very important in occult terms, and we find that symbolism of it, as I've explained. You find that in The Matrix, you find that in Alice in Wonderland, or through The Looking Glass, and the similarities there with the White Rabbit, through the rabbit hole, the Red Queen, kind of like Resident Evil, where you've got this Red Queen AI hive mind. There's a lot of incredible symbolism to put together there, the woman in the red dress. And so Eminem is singing to this demon, and he's singing in the mirror. And the demon says, or he speaks through Eminem, Eminem says, "'Cause I possess your soul, your mind, your heart, and your body." Now, that is not just, in my opinion, someone singing about being possessed by fame. When you see these consistencies, like you said, Mark, it's not a coincidence. We're dealing with something more significant than just sheer entertainment here.
Well, that's right. And on that track, you've got Eminem arguing with, the other side of himself and taunting the other side of himself. And he just sounds completely crazy. It puts me in mind of a movie that came out a few years ago called Identity. It starred John Cusack and Ray Liotta. And on the surface of it, it appears to be a rather Agatha Christie-like whodunit type thing. You have a bunch of strangers stranded at a motel on this rainy night, and one by one, they're all getting killed off. And you start to wonder who the killer is. But when you get to the end of the film, spoiler alert, you come to discover that all these characters are the alter egos of a mental patient in an institution that's created all these different personas, and he's kind of using certain alter egos to kill off other ones, these identities that he's created for himself in his mind. So the whole film is playing out in this mental patient's mind. And you listen to that track by Eminem and it sounds like the same bloody thing's going on. But that's far from an isolated thing in itself, because, having been a DJ within the hip-hop genre for many years, I've seen how this scene has evolved and gone through these different phases. And there was this one phase towards the end of the 90s, starting right about 1998. And that was actually the year that Eminem broke through. His debut album appeared at the end of 98. And it's easy to forget how shocking his material was at the time. We're all used to it now. Everyone's used to Eminem talking about murder and mutilation and carving up his baby mother and all this kind of thing. But at the time, nobody had heard that. And it was really shocking, particularly the track 97 Bonnie and Clyde, where he's with his daughter and he's basically killed his daughter's mother, slit her throat, and he's got her in the back of the car, and he's taken his daughter out in the middle of the night to dump her mother's body in a lake, and he gets her to help him push the body into the lake. I mean, how sick and dark is that? Nobody had heard stuff like that when Eminem first emerged. But round about that time, you also had a rapper called Cameron, and he put out an album in 98 called Confessions of Fire. And there's some really dark demonic stuff on there where he's sort of having conversations with a darker aspect of himself. And also you had DMX breaking through. He had an album called It's Dark and Hell is Hot. And on this album, he introduces a character called Damien. This is another alter ego. It's rather like Eminem on My Darling. You hear DMX having a conversation with this sort of demonic aspect of himself, which he calls Damien. And this Damien is sort of whispering stuff in his ear and coercing him to go and do really bad stuff, like murder people. Then the Damien character crops up on DMX's next album, and DMX is he starts off the track seemingly having moved on from that whole experience, but then you realize that this Damien thing has attached itself to him, and it starts whispering in his ear again. And at the end of the track, he says, "I see now, ain't going to be nothing but trouble ahead." There's a similar thing on Snoop Doggy Dogg's debut album, Doggy Style, produced by Dr. Dre, which came out in 1993. There's a track on that called Murder Was the Case, where Snoop is depicted as having been shot in this drive-by shooting, and he's in hospital at death's door. It's touch and go as to whether he's going to live, and this entity comes to him, starts whispering in his ear, and says, "I will make you famous and successful beyond all your wildest dreams, and give to you a lifestyle that you couldn't even conceive of before if you will just surrender yourself to me." And Snoop goes with the deal. And this seems to speak to the nature of the deal that many of these artists make. We hear so much talk of musicians having sold their souls for fame and fortune. It's a legend that goes all the way back to Robert Johnson, the blues musician in the 1930s, who's said to have made a deal with the devil, this entity known as the devil, at the crossroads in exchange for great musical talent. It's the Faustian principle, going back to the German story of Faust, selling your soul in exchange for great things. And we've seen this so many times, decade after decade, through the music industry, where musicians have spoken of selling their soul for fame and fortune. Sometimes they make no bones about it, and they actually use that language. There's famous interviews with Bob Dylan and Katy Perry that you see trotted out time and time again, where they seem to be letting you know what they've done in exchange for their fortune. And you have Ozzy Osbourne talking about having been possessed, and you've got all these different stars. Gene Simmons of Kiss has made comments like that as well. Many of them have.
You see this like I do. I absolutely see this as more than a metaphor. You see it as more than a metaphor when they say they've sold their souls.
Absolutely. I don't think it's just a witty phrase that they come out with to have impact or to be controversial. I think they really mean it. They have given over an aspect of themselves. Again, it would be through free will. Free will, as I mentioned earlier, can be coerced and manipulated, and somebody can be tricked into giving it. But they have made that decision, made that choice to go over to the dark side, if you like, and they have shown themselves to want the fame and the fortune and to stoke their ego to such a degree, and to have all these material trappings and all the wealth and all the rest of it, yachts and fast cars. They've shown themselves to want all that so much that they are prepared to degrade their very humanity, their very spirituality, in order to achieve that. It's a deal that can never, ever be worth it. And there are many instances of artists who appear to greatly regret having made that deal. Again, the famous interview with Bob Dylan that he did with Ed Bradley, look that one up, where he seems to be full of regret when he talks about having made a deal with the chief commander of this world and the one that we can't see, and holding up his end of the deal. Eminem appears to me somebody that greatly regrets what he's done as well. There have been instances of him seemingly trying to break free of the industry and get free of the shackles of the restrictive contract that he has, and just, be autonomous and leave the whole thing behind. But he can never do it. He's always back with a new album before too long. And each album of his just seems to get darker and darker in terms of the material. You get the impression that this is a guy who realizes that he's in too deep, and he just can't get out, no matter how much he would want to. So when you take that deal, there is no way out. It's a one-way street, and your ass is owned in a very real sense.
I think one of the more recent songs that's come out that has literally shown everything from the sex kitten mind control to what you just explained about Eminem, to the literal prison that these artists are in, to the altering of and creating of alternate personalities, and that is the Taylor Swift song, Look What You Made Me Do, where literally there is a clip where she says, she's speaking on the phone, and she says, the real Taylor Swift can't come to the phone right now. Why? Oh, because she's dead, and she laughs about it, and the song continues on, where they literally put the real Taylor Swift into a grave, and this demon-looking, zombie-like Taylor Swift comes out of the grave. And they show in this music video, Taylor Swift, she's got lobster and champagne and all these beautiful things, but she's trapped inside of a cage, swinging on a swing like a bird in a cage, and there are these handlers that surround the cage, which is what we've seen with Lindsay Lohan. We've seen that Miley Cyrus, Billy Ray Cyrus even talked about her handlers. So we see this literally portrayed as if it's like a documentary in the music video. I mean, it's really incredible, Mark. I mean, how blatant it is.
It is more truth in plain sight. And I think that's probably a kind of death of the ego type ritual that we're seeing play out right in front of us, where, an individual's core persona is laid to rest and other aspects of themselves are brought through. So, actually, when you get into this whole Paul McCartney situation, we probably shouldn't today, because we'll be here for another 4 hours. That's probably something for another show. But,
save it for next time.
The whole idea that Paul McCartney was replaced and the whole legend of Paul is dead, the official sort of conspiracy theory there is that the real Paul McCartney died in 1966 in a car accident, according to the myth, and an imposter took his place and has been playing the public role of Paul McCartney ever since. But when you get more into that whole area of research, and believe me, I've spent way more time than is healthy for any human to spend looking at that, to the detriment of my sanity, it seems sometimes, you start to see that there's way more to it. And there's actually no documentary verifiable evidence that Paul McCartney ever did die in 1966. It seems to be more the case that there's been two individuals paging in and out of the Paul role all these years. Sometimes we see one of them, sometimes we see the other. It wasn't just a straight replacement back in 1966. But a lot of people that really get into that whole thing will say that all the symbolism on the sleeve of Sgt. Pepper and Abbey Road and all these other different Beatles photographs and stuff may be hinting at the death of the ego of the original Paul McCartney, not the physical death of him, but the death of that aspect of him. We're getting into what is said to happen when people go on psychedelic trips here. I've never done one myself, but people that have taken LSD and things like ayahuasca and mescaline and DMT often talk of the death of the ego, where you lose that part of yourself that is very much attached to this material plane, and you access, your higher self and higher spiritual aspects of yourself. So you say goodbye to that part of yourself that's very much rooted in base consciousness, in other words. So people say that might be what's getting alluded to with this whole Paul McCartney was replaced thing, and Paul McCartney is dead. And that's, like I say, that's something for another day, but it's probably just worth a brief reference there in light of what we've just been talking about. Yeah, anytime I've opened up Musical Truth, I think I've seen Paul McCartney's name in there several times, no matter where I open it to. So I know, you would. Yeah. I know you've spent an incredible amount of time researching that. I have a few things that come to mind. The first thing is on the subject of leaving certain material aspects behind. That reminds me of the Florence and the Machine song, where she's singing about the horses coming, the dog days of summer, and leaving the material possessions behind because you can't take them with you if you want to survive. That's part of the lyric. A couple other things that come to mind I want listeners to be aware of is if you really want to see kind of a blatant and obvious form of, I wouldn't really consider it subliminal, but it's a form of subliminal messaging. Watch the Kesha video Die Young, which was released right around the same time as the Sandy Hook shooting, which actually it was pulled from the radio because it was causing people to become very, very upset after the shooting. And that's right. She has the song Die Young. And in that song, Mark, you notice they literally, for a fraction of that, it doesn't even seem like a frame. It just seems like shorter than a frame. They flash the word evil on the screen, and they flash the Jolly Roger, the skull and crossbones. And the whole rest of the song is about sexual debauchery. There's the pentagram that's kind of inverted in its usage, because otherwise the pentagram's a powerful defensive symbol. They're using all of these very classical symbols that people see and think of, ooh, the Illuminati, ooh, it's devil worship. It's a sigil fest from start to finish. It absolutely is. It absolutely is. And whether we're looking at the symbols so blatantly in that video, or we're looking at the Taylor Swift Look What You Made Me Do, where she's talking about being replaced by this clone, there's a scene where she's literally almost crucified on a cross in the classical Christian iconography, and she has all of these other versions of herself climbing up, and when they fall, when all of these other personalities fall, it's so powerfully symbolic. That's when she says, and I actually have the clip here, I'll play it, all these personalities fall, and then here's what she says.
I'm sorry, the old Taylor can't come to the phone right now. Why? Oh, 'cause she's dead.
Oh, 'cause she's dead. And the rest of the music video just is it's one of the most crazy, blatant videos I've ever seen showing this all kind of in a successive order of like killing off one personality and creating a new one. And what that is it's the rebirth, the bringing forth of a new personality, where the original personality is there, like we've seen with Eminem, trying to get out, but then he keeps coming back. And they appear under these different personifications, or manifestations, whether it's Slim Shady, or it's the Rain Man, or Taylor Swift has all of these different characters that she plays. Or one of the best examples, Mark, might be Miley Cyrus, where she literally, in a TV show for kids on the Disney Channel, she played a girl who, when she put on the blonde wig, she became Hannah Montana. Otherwise, she was just Miley Cyrus. And so I want to ask you about that. That's one of the things that I've researched for a long time. Miley Cyrus, the blonde wig. Eminem, when he becomes Slim Shady, he said all Slim Shady is a bottle of hair bleach and vodka. Blonde hair. Britney Spears shaved her head, short blonde hair. Amanda Bynes shaved her head, blonde hair, and she put on that blue wig when she went to court and had that stuff with the microchip in her brain, she said. Kanye West, he had his little psychological evaluation after that concert, came out, short blonde hair. And there's even the music video with the little girl that dances for Sia, S-I-A, which is kind of like CIA. She wears the blonde wig. Katy Perry in Bon Appetit, she has her hair cut and she has the short blonde hair. I know that relates to the Marilyn Monroe sex kit mind control, but I wanted to ask you, Mark, of all people, what do you think about that? Am I on target there?
Well, the blonde hair thing is absolutely valid. Just before I forget, let me just pick up on that Kesha song, Die Young, because after there was all that feigned indignation over the Sandy Hook incident, and people were saying, isn't it terrible there's a song on the radio called Die Young? Well, actually, there's far worse stuff on the radio than just that. But Kesha came out in an interview and said, I never even wanted to sing that song. She said, I was made to sing it, which kind of speaks to the true nature of these artists and those that tell them what to do. And Kesha had that whole thing going on with Dr. Luke, who was her producer / manager / mind control handler. She had this legal case a couple of years ago where she came out and stated that Dr. Luke had sexually and emotionally abused her, basically raped her, and had been her abuser for many years during that relationship. And there was this long-running court battle between herself and Dr. Luke, who would appear to be an absolute demonic parasite who's been linked with so many of these pop stars. You think of any successful household name pop artist of the past 10 years or so, and it's pretty much a given that Dr. Luke worked with them as a manager or a producer or in some capacity. So there's a lot to know about that piece of work, I tell you. But the blonde hair thing, yeah, there was an article on Vigilant Citizen, which is a site that I go to.
I like them.
Yeah, for quite a lot of information. He put out an article last year, I believe it was, or it might have been the tail end of 2016. It was in light of Kanye West's famous meltdown on stage at his concert in Sacramento, where he started rambling incoherently for several minutes. And actually, he dropped a bunch of truth bombs in there, in amongst all this seemingly haphazard stuff that he was just blurting out. He kept making references to Jay-Z, suggesting that he was some kind of mind control handler. And he kept saying, Jay, don't be sending those killers up in my head now, bro, and things like that. And he starts talking about Trump and all of this. Anyway, Kanye gets forcibly taken off the stage after his rant. In the media, it's just put down to, oh, Kanye, what is he like? He's such a crazy guy. His ego's out of control. And everyone just chalks it up as that. But he gets forcibly handcuffed to a gurney and taken off for psychiatric evaluation. And it wouldn't surprise me if he got taken to Cedars Sinai Medical Center in LA. I'd have to check on that. But that is a location that crops up time and time again in this research in terms of where many celebrities are taken to for psychiatric evaluation. And I'm pretty sure it doubles as a mind control programming unit. Deeply sinister place. Anyway, after a while, a few days, I think it might be, or a couple of weeks or whatever, Kanye emerges back in public and he's got newly peroxide blonde dyed hair. As you mentioned a short while back, many artists appear following a makeover when they've been out of the public eye for a short while with newly dyed blonde hair and often closely cropped, cut short. Justin Bieber popped up with that look in a video for a DJ Khaled song last year. Then you've got Katy Perry, you've got Miley Cyrus, all these other artists that you spoke about. Obviously, Eminem's entire image has been based around the peroxide blonde look. It's interesting that Dolores O'Riordan, who was the singer with the Irish group The Cranberries, who turned up dead in a hotel room in London, in January of this year in a bathtub, like you do, happens all the time, it seems. Early on in her career was pictured with closely cropped blonde hair. We start to see many patterns and trends emerge. Dolores O'Riordan is one of many artists who has spoken in interviews of having been bipolar and having battled these different mental conditions over the years. She also talked of having been sexually abused when she was a child. That is something also that crops up time and time again. So you got the blonde hair link thing there. You got the strange death of Dolores O'Riordan, which has not been adequately explained, as so many of them never are. But the blonde cropped hair thing crops up again, going way back to the movie Rosemary's Baby, 1968, where you've got Mia Farrow's character. She was a wife of Woody Allen for a time. That movie was directed by Roman Polanski, the convicted paedophile and occultist, who was also caught up in that whole Manson, Sharon Tate situation. So this movie came out in 1968, and you've got Mia Farrow's character who unwittingly falls in with a satanic cult. And everyone around her is a part of this cult, including her husband and her neighbors and the doctor and everyone that she thinks she can trust. There's a point in the movie where it depicts her being impregnated, seemingly, by some sort of demonic entity taken to be the devil. And, of course, she bears the child of this entity, which is where the Rosemary's Baby title comes from. But it's interesting to me that round about that point in the film, she goes from having sort of shoulder-length, reddish brown hair to closely cropped blonde hair. She has a haircut and she's now blonde for the rest of the movie. And it seems to indicate something that has happened to her. She's taken part in this ritual, and from that point on, it marks her out as having been, involved in this thing. So Vigilant Citizen in that article is postulating that the closely cropped blonde hair thing is code for those in the know that this is an individual that has undergone programming and is, now ready for the next stage. We see this with so many sigils and icons and motifs that keep cropping up in music videos and photographs and things like that. And the idea is, again, that this is a secret coded language for those that know how to interpret these things, that lets them know that this is an artist that is, a part of this program.
I saw a Lady Gaga song. It's pretty famous. It's called Judas. Have you heard that one?
Yeah, I know that one.
Yeah, and she says, Jesus is my virtue, Judas is the demon I cling to. And on the subject of demons, and we talked about the Rain Man, we talked about the blonde hair, which is one of my favorite subjects to kind of analyze because it's really, really blatant, is a Katy Perry song called Dark Horse, which received a lot of attention because of the strange nature of how it seems like the imagery in that music video, which was Egyptian and that weird like candy cupcake thing that Katy Perry does. And it went from that in the music video to this really dark, like black mass that was performed at the Music Awards. And in that song, Katy Perry says, I go through and watch these videos and then I write down some of the lyrics and analyze them for shows sometimes, Mark. Katy Perry said, "So you want to play with magic. You should know what you're falling for. Once you're mine, there's no going back." Now, most people interpret that, as I can see this interpretation too, as being related to sexuality, being related to falling in love with somebody or lusting after somebody. And on one level, that's true, just like Rain Man. Is it true? I grew up around hip-hop. I've been to clubs. I know about how the rain making in a club works. You throw the money in the air. I know what,
throw the notes in the air. Yeah,
I know what making it rain means. You know what making it, but it goes to a different level, Mark. Of course, I think on one level, yeah, you get it's love, it's sex, it's money, but on another level, it's something deeper. She's really speaking a very powerful, magical truth there. You want to play
everything comes with a cover story, doesn't it? They've got to have plausible deniability. So they've always got to be able to make the statement, oh, this song is just about this. That's why these lyrics are there. So they can write it off as something innocent, whereas something far darker is lurking beneath the surface, but most people just don't think to go there.
Exactly. And what Katy Perry says about magic is not only true, but we watch it transition from her to another rapper called Juicy J. And Juicy J says, "She can be my sleeping beauty. I'm going to put her in a coma." I mean, the pattern, as we've been talking about here, and just looking at different songs, I know this could be repetitive to some people, but it's really important to recognize that this is everywhere. And this is not just a few isolated cases that other people might see as, well, that's an interesting pattern, but it's nothing more than that. No, this is everywhere. The entertainment industry is saturated with this stuff.
Yeah. And the thing about that Katy Perry performance at the, was it the Grammys? I think it was the Grammys.
Yes.
A few years ago, 2015 maybe, she brought out this dark horse of the title, and it was this animal that had these glowing red eyes that made it look demonic. It is very reminiscent of the statue that is in place at Denver International Airport. I've never flown through that airport myself, but I've seen pictures of this horse that is there for no apparent reason. There's all sorts of dark occultic stuff on the murals at Denver Airport. And apparently that horse, when it was put into place, fell on top of the guy that was installing it and killed him. So how much of an omen is that? And then it crops up in this... Yep.
I'm sorry, maybe you were going to say it. I didn't mean to take it away from you, but Preston Nichols' The Montauk Project. That's the cover of the book, is the black horse with the glowing eyes.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know that. I just heard that it killed some guy when it fell on him. The thing about that Katy Perry ritual, because that's what it was, is it actually got attention from the mainstream media because it was so blatant. They'd taken the whole thing so far beyond just a pop show with a fluffy pop artist, you know. Mainstream newspapers and entertainment sites were picking up on it. So I've got some examples of this in the book. You had these organizations tweeting saying, wait, did we just witness an actual witchcraft mass going on here? Was that actually some occult ritual dressed up as entertainment? You have mainstream sites that never normally speak in these terms questioning it because they've taken it so far. It's so friggin' blatant to everyone that it's going on. And again, these are shows that are watched by kids. Katy Perry is marketed at young girls of my daughter's age. So it becomes the responsibility of any parent to start paying attention to what masquerades as innocent mainstream entertainment, because in actual fact it's anything but. And when you've got mainstream sources like that questioning it, who never normally go anywhere near anything vaguely conspiratorial, then they really have pushed the bloody envelope as far as they can.
Mark, I'd like to give you an opportunity now. If you want to go through anything else, like if I was being interviewed, which I am sometimes, and someone's interviewing me about my book or whatever the subject might be, and there's just that one other thing or that handful of things that I want to talk about, but I didn't get a chance to work it in, I'd like to give you that opportunity now to work in whatever it is that you'd like to work in. Anything else you'd like to mention about your books, about your work, and about anything else we've talked about today. We can still expand on this for the remainder of the segment if that's all right with you.
Sure. Well, I appreciate you giving me that opportunity. You obviously know how these things work. You know, when you are being interviewed on a show of this length, you go into so many different directions and cover so many different things that you don't always get the opportunity to finish a point. Yeah, you're a proper pro. You know that sometimes people do want to go back and finish some points that they'd started. So I did make some notes of some stuff that I wanted to mention earlier. When we were talking about the sound frequencies and things that could be getting stripped into recordings without the conscious knowledge of those that get to hear them, I just wanted to raise a story which is often told. I've mentioned it in both of my books and many other researchers go into it as well, but I think it certainly justifies every retelling because it says so much about what really goes on in the industry. I'm talking about this individual by the name of John Todd, also known as John Todd Collins, and his real name would appear to have been Lance Collins. He came from a long-running generational bloodline of witches, and he was put to use in the music industry in the US in the 1970s. So there's an interview that you can get with him online. It's available on YouTube. It's sort of gone into legend now in terms of the amount of people that share it and make reference to it. And he's talking about his time in the industry as the manager of this company called Zodiac Productions. And he's talking about the links that this organization had to many of the big record labels at the time. He says that in turn it was owned or operated by Lloyds of London, Standard Oil, and Manhattan Chase Bank. That's who was really behind it all. He's talking about a story involving David Crosby of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young and the Byrds. And he says he bumped into David Crosby sometime in the 1970s in LA after he, John Todd, had been out of the industry for a few years after having done his work. And he's asking David Crosby if the industry still employs certain practices that were in place during his years. And he says, tell me, do they still take the master of a recording into the temple room in the record company HQ and bring in the coven of witches to cast a spell on it? And Crosby says, yeah, sure, you know they do. And he then asked Crosby if to be a successful player in the industry, do you have to be a witch, and do you have to be well versed in witch language, this method of communication that's only understood by those that are a part of this secret fraternity? And Crosby says, yeah, of course that's still going on. But the first part of that is where he reveals that the master tape recording of any album that they wanted to put out, and this is back in the 1970s, would have a group of witches brought in, and they would conjure up a hex or a spell that they would imbue into the tape. And the idea is that every time a copy is made of that tape and a version of the record goes out into the public, part of that signature dark energy attaches itself to it and therefore goes into the home of the consumer. It might sound far-fetched to people, but this is coming from this guy that says that he was a part of the industry, and this is what he claims was going on in the 1970s. So if this was happening 40, 50 years ago, who knows what that practice might have evolved into now, particularly with things all being done digitally and electronically and being able to get embedded in that way. There's just a few other variations on that theme that have come across my radar as well. There's a researcher called Janice Barcelo, who's an author. She put out a book on birth trauma. That's her whole thing, which is a very harrowing area of research. But she's also got into the pornography industry, and at her talk at Free Your Mind a couple of years ago in Philadelphia, she was talking about a similar practice, which she says takes place in the pornography industry, where they sort of imbue videos and DVDs and movies and stuff that are going to go out to the general public with some of this dark energy, and they put spells on that stuff before it goes out. There's an insider that worked on the original Star Wars movie with George Lucas that has come forward and said that at a point in the film's production, a bunch of occultists or witches, I guess, were brought in, mediums, whatever, and they would stare into the film reels during the production of the film. And the idea was that they were concentrating certain thoughts and certain intents into the master reels of the film before it would then go out to be duplicated and that film would be released to the general public. There's a story of Winston Churchill during World War II. Apparently he was a bit of a keen occultist himself, and apparently he assembled a group of witches on the cliffs of Kent there on the coast of England. And this was at a time where an attack by German warships was said to be imminent, according to military intelligence. The idea was that Churchill assembled these witches to stare out over the sea towards where this invasion would be coming from, in the direction of France, and concentrate their will and their intent on this invasion being turned back and not happening the way it was intended to. There's a story of the McAfee software company having this ritual on the lawn of their corporate building, which they were just about to open, where they assembled some witches and they performed a ritual concentrating their energy on the building to give it certain, required outcomes. Are we seeing a pattern emerging here? All these different companies, all these different parts of the world, and yet the same sort of idea is being trotted out. And these are all stories that, they all come with citations and they can all be verified. I'm not just pulling this stuff out of my arse. And the final one to mention here is, let me just get the reference to it if I've still got it. There was an album that came out by the Foo Fighters. Dave Grohl is an interesting character to get into when you look at the connections of his father, who worked in connection with the White House and with American presidents and stuff. So it's yet another rock star who has family connections going into these aspects of the establishment. So somebody brought to my attention the fact that there was a Foo Fighters album in 2011 called Wasting Light, and Dave Grohl settled on the idea of mastering it on analog reel-to-reel tape, old school style, in his garage. So he didn't want it computer produced the way records are these days. He wanted to go back to basics and put it on a reel of tape. They hit upon the idea, or Grohl personally did, of shredding up this master tape into tiny little shards and putting a tiny microscopic shard of audio tape into each of the CD jewel cases of the album that would then go out into the public. It's said to be a marketing gimmick, but what if there's more to it? And if we cast our minds back to this John Todd anecdote about how dark energy is cast into the master tape of a recording back in the day, I wonder if there was some aspect of that going on with this album. That might be a bit of a stretch. It is, of course, speculation. But when you factor in all these other stories, which come to us from all these different sources, it seems that there's something going on there. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. I appreciate you joining me on the broadcast this evening and going into so many details. And it's amazing to speak with somebody like you who has done the research and who has focused on this more specifically than I have, covering so many different subjects. But as we talked about earlier, no matter where you really start, it all comes together. I mean, you could start studying film and you come into the music industry. You could start there and you can look at mind control experiments conducted by various governments around the world throughout history. You find that there is a thread and there is a pattern that connects all of this together. And to me, it's powerful and positive to know these things so they don't affect us so directly or even indirectly in the subconscious, so that we can override the programming, like television programming. We can override the programming. We can override the intentionality of those more black magicians, if you will, and we can take better control of what we think and how we truly feel, and not allow our lives to be dictated by people that either are or are not aware themselves or are being used as marionettes to carry out agendas that are dark, that are political, that are cult-like, that are demonic, that are satanic, and also to stop assisting in what it seems to be, from what we've discussed, the conjuring and the evoking of true demons and spirits through music and through all of the various forms of entertainment, because entertainment is to give attention or consideration, and where energy flows, that's where attention is. Attention goes where energy flows where attention goes, and so on and so forth. It kind of creates a feedback loop. So, Mark, if there's anything else that you'd like to add, talk about your books maybe, The Musical Truth, Volume 1 and 2, your podcast series, your website again. Just take your time, go through this, let listeners know where they can find you, and some of the other things that maybe you didn't mention. If you cover anything else you'd like to speak about that as well, go ahead.
Sure. Well, I'll just finish by saying that a criticism I often get to the work that I put out, and any other researcher dealing with this type of information is going to get the same thing, is that it's very dark, it's very disturbing, it's very unsettling, it's negative, it makes people feel uncomfortable when they hear it. Well, absolutely it would, because it flies in the face of everything we've been trained to accept about what the entertainment industry is. But wouldn't you rather know? If this stuff is going on, would you not rather be aware of it rather than continuing to live in ignorance and being under the spell of mind control? I certainly would always want to know the truth of a matter. That's just me. It has to be the free will of the individual. You can't ram this stuff down somebody's throat if they don't want to hear it. But my work is all about giving people the opportunity to make better decisions for themselves, based on information that is freely available. So I provide all the references and the citations for stuff that I come out with. Generally speaking, where I speculate on something, I make it clear that it is just a speculation, but most of the stuff can be absolutely verified by anyone that wants to go and check over it. I don't do this job for fun. I don't do it to become popular, and I certainly don't do it to make money. Anyone that throws that accusation at you really is talking out of their arse and has no clue about how this whole realm of research operates. There are things that I would prefer to be doing with my life. I do get fulfillment and satisfaction out of doing this when people are gracious enough to give me feedback and say that I've really helped them to better understand what's going on in this world, and they are able to make better decisions for themselves and their families. That's certainly rewarding. But, this work can get you down because you are wallowing in some very dark material sometimes, and you do have to take a bit of time out and, go out into nature or spend some time with your family or whatever to regroup and be able to come back to it and continue on. So it's not easy to do this. And like I said earlier, it's not something I ever imagined I'd be doing with my life. But it seems this is the path that I need to tread. So I'm just trying to help people to come to these comprehensions if they're prepared to go there. That's why I do all of this, and I'm going to continue doing it now for as long as it needs to be done. So I just wanted to finish on that note, really. In terms of where people can find further material of mine, my YouTube channel is youtube.com/MarkDevlinTV. There's a whole bunch of my conference talks posted up on there. And all of my podcasts, my conversation-based podcasts, that series is called Good Vibrations. They're all on my YouTube channel as well. They also reside on my Spreaker page. So Good Vibrations, I'm up to 130 volumes of that. And it's conversations with researchers in the truth, conspiracy, alternative research arenas. I also do a podcast called The Sound of Freedom, which is conscious music. And this is meaningful message music from real artists. It's what popular music should be used for. Uplifting people, communicating inspiring messages, making people feel positive, articulating thoughts that many people often have, but they can feel alone and isolated until somebody else lets them know that they're feeling the same way as them. So I showcase a bunch of music that brings through all this stuff. It's material you don't stand a chance of hearing on the regular radio or on TV or in clubs. And I bring it all together in this Sound of Freedom show that I do. I'm up to 86 volumes on that. It's mainly conscious hip hop. There's some reggae in there as well. There's some soulful stuff. But I do go back to old rock records and stuff from the 60s and 70s as well, where there's meaningful messages being conveyed. So that's all available for people. And then the books, as you very kindly mentioned several times, are available on Amazon, volumes 1 and 2 of Musical Truth. But if people want to get a copy from me personally and cut Amazon out of the picture, then we can do a deal via PayPal. And you've just got to drop me an email to markdevlinuk@gmail.com. And we can make that happen. And I can post books out to anywhere in the world in that way. And I just want to thank you, Ryan, for having me on. I've heard a few of your shows, and you go deep, brother. You go deeper than a deep-sea diver in a shipwreck. So
thank you.
It's been great to be a part of your show. You've got a tremendous amount of knowledge yourself. You've clearly put in the hours of research, and I commend you for that. So I'm very happy to have been a part of your show today. Thanks again for the invitation.
Thank you for joining me, Mark. I appreciate it, and all of the work that you've done. I've learned a lot of things this evening, no matter how much time I've spent doing research on these types of subjects. That's why it's always important to speak with other people who have done the research.
Oh, we all learn from each other, for sure.
Absolutely. Even people that disagree, they can provide me with a different perspective, perhaps, and help me to better understand what it is that we're looking at. So, sure. Mark Devlin is our guest this evening. His website, www.markdevlin.co.uk. His information, YouTube, Spreaker, all of it linked up on our website under the guest page, www.thesecretteachings.info. We'll come back after this break, and we'll have one more segment, but Mark is going to be leaving us. Our email, rdgable@yahoo.com. If you have questions, comments, concerns, social media, facebook.com/thesecretteachings. And our website, as I gave it out, you'll find topics, top news, merchandise, my book, Occult Arcana, and our subscription service, which gets you access to the full show archive with great guests like Mark Devlin and timeless subjects. www.thesecretteachings.info. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes and wrap up the show. Stay tuned.
If you enjoy the Secret Teachings radio broadcast, all the time and effort we put into production, research, and hosting, and our unwillingness to sell our souls for profit or fame, visit our website at www.thesecretteachings.info and get yourself a t-shirt, coffee mug, and Ryan's book, Occult Arcana, which he will autograph for you, and subscribe for unlimited downloads and streams of all our past broadcasts. Every yearly subscriber will also receive a digital copy of that book free. So visit www.thesecretteachings.info and support a show that has been banned from countless networks and conferences for honestly expressing what goes on behind the scenes. That's www.thesecretteachings.info for books, shirts, and subscriptions.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7 with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Hey, Fringe FM listeners, did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or no Wi-Fi available, you can still listen to every minute of the Fringe FM by calling 701-719-3971. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. Saves your data plan and no extra cost if you have unlimited minutes. Call 701-719-3971. That's 701-719-3971. Listen to the Fringe FM on any phone, anytime, anywhere.
As we move to expand and grow the Secret Teachings radio show and the website, thesecretteachings.info, we need your support. Not only are we brazenly blunt and talk about scary subjects, the point of the show is not fear for ratings. It is about empowering you, the listener. If you feel you learn or take anything away from the show, please consider donating a few dollars a month to support what we're doing here at The Secret Teachings. Visit our website and click the PayPal donation link at the top of the page. That's www.thesecretteachings.info. Again, www.thesecretteachings.info.
This is Kev Baker of The Kev Baker Show. You can find me at Truth Frequency Radio or on my home website, www.kevbakershow.com. And you're listening to The Secret Teachings with Ryan Gable.
Welcome back to the Secret Teachings radio broadcast. I'm your host, Ryan Gable. Mark Devlin joined us this evening to talk about Musical Truth, his 2-volume series on the subject of mind control, symbolism, and the history of music, providing us with perhaps a different perspective than some of you may have heard before. I learned some stuff from Mark, and likewise I think he learned some stuff from me. And that's why we should always listen, I think, to each other, to see what the other person thinks, to see what the other person sees, to see what the other person finds in their research. And I literally sit here with thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces of paper. I have an entire crate of news articles and research from 7 years of investigation into topics from health to my favorite subject, I think, and that is the occult, and looking at how the occult applies to things like the entertainment industry. I talked about earlier and throughout the broadcast with Mark Devlin that the word entertain refers to the giving of attention and consideration to something. Because where our attention goes, that's where energy flows. And when we look at movies, we look at television programming, we look at books, we look at news, we look at music, and we look at music videos, they are saturated with a very similar, common, consistent, repetitive theme that relates to the subjects of occultism and esoterica. And I think because many of the symbols that are used are so fascinating in and of themselves, because of the mystique and the mystery, we become fascinated, we become mesmerized. And so those that produce movies and music videos, and music in particular, the entire music industry, utilize these symbols and utilize certain phrases and the power of chants and the power of words, because words are composed of letters, which are, of course, symbols, which have a unique vibratory frequency, much like the magic squares of the classical planets. When you look at the magic square of the sun equals, in all 6 of its columns and all 6 of its rows, 111. And if you take the 111 from the magic square of the sun and you multiply it by the 6 rows and columns, you get the number 666. Likewise, if you take the magic square of Saturn and you add up each of its 3 columns and rows, you get the number 15, 15, and 15. And numerologically speaking, the number 15 is the number 6, because once you count to the number 10, 10 becomes 1. And so when you get to 15, 15 becomes 6, 666. 666 is the number of the sun, and it is the number of the black sun. It is the number of Peter, or Jupiter. It is the number of Saturn. It is the number of the Dark Lord, the number of Darth Vader, the Dark Father, the Lord of the Rings. And so the Lord of the Rings also could refer to trees, because you have the rings of a tree and the wisdom of the tree. You saw this in the Lord of the Rings films, the talking trees, the wise trees. And I think that feeds back into what I was talking with Mark about earlier in relationship to the usage of woods, be that in the Stranger Things TV show, where the Demogorgon first appears to us as viewers on Mirkwood and chases Will through the woods to his home, to the shed, where he is eventually taken into the Upside Down. You see the woods used in Man of the Woods, Justin Timberlake, Justin Timberlake's new album. He used that music at the Super Bowl halftime show. So again, millions of people watch that, and that's where the energy flows, where our attention goes. We give our entertainment our attention. We give our entertainment our consideration. We're put into a trance. We are lulled into a very comfortable state, and we become more open to suggestibility so that we can be sold products, and we can be sold political ideologies, and we can be sold agendas that perhaps are much darker and sinister and evil. To use the word evil, because Mark Devlin used that word earlier, although he said he doesn't necessarily want to use that word in the context, and I agree with him. I don't like to use the word evil in that context, because evil is typically perceived as something different than I think it really is. Evil is a reverse of the word live. It's an inversion, and that's what black magic and that's what occultism in the darkest forms really is. It's a perversion of those things that otherwise bring us to a better understanding of the world. It is a perversion of those things that are otherwise shrouded in light. And so if we have a look at some of the most famous musicians, and especially those artists of the 21st century, you find this reoccurring theme of demons and possession. You find this reoccurring theme of worshiping entities, worshiping energies, much like the magic squares of the planets, the magic square of the sun. Those magic squares provide us with the basis for which we can draw out the planetary sigil, and that sigil is a symbol, and that symbol is very powerful and energetic. It is the signature of that planet. And when we see these types of symbols utilized by the entertainment industry, we are pouring our attention and thus our energy by paying attention and by paying currency, energy, money for watching a movie, for watching a television show, for our Netflix, for DVDs, for video games, whatever the case might be. We're pouring that energy, attention, currency, etc. into this entertainment. We're giving our attention, our consideration, our money, our currency. And I think that has a very, very powerful effect when we look at the symbols and the words, which are made up of letters, which are symbols and have their own energetic, vibratory frequencies. And that is very, very powerful in invoking or evoking these forces that are spoken about and that are referred to in these types of songs and in this type of entertainment in particular. Because it's one thing to sit down and watch a movie that is laced with this type of symbolism, but it's another thing to listen to it in a song and to listen to it repetitively. You might watch a movie over and over again, but it's very unlikely you're going to sit and watch the same movie over and over and over again. But we listen to the same song over and over and over again. We hear it on the radio over and over and over again. When we watch a movie, we might have a line or two that remains stuck in our head, as we say. But when we hear a song, some of us hear that song. We might not like the song, and yet it is stuck in our head, and we can sing it. I wake up in the morning sometimes. I'm singing songs. I don't even know what they're saying, and yet somehow I have the lyrics in my head. I talked with Mark about that too. He agreed. He's got the same issue. I think a lot of us do. We hear things that we don't even like, and yet somehow we have the song memorized. That's very, very powerful. Very, very powerful. Something powerful and dark is operating within these forms of entertainment. I mentioned to Mark this Lady Gaga song, Judas. Judas, of course, the backbiter, Scorpio, astrologically, who gave the kiss of death to Jesus. And Lady Gaga in this song, Judas, she says, Jesus is my virtue, and Judas is the demon I cling to. And if you really want an amazing study in the worship of demons in the entertainment industry, you look no further than Eminem, Slim Shady, Marshall Mathers. I mean, he literally has songs, as Mark and I talked about, referring to the Rain Man, the conjuring of the Rain Man, the relationship to the umbrella, Ella, and the Umbra from the Necronomicon and H.P. Lovecraft. But he literally sings songs where he's talking to a demon, where the voice of the demon is part of the song. The demon comes back and speaks to him. Lady Gaga singing about the exact same thing. And on one level, yes, it is metaphoric. But on another level, it is not metaphoric. It is real. At least that's what I would suggest. Another really great example of that would be the Katy Perry song Dark Horse, where she's singing with a Juicy J. That's the musician. I guess you could call this person a musician, Juicy J. And Katy Perry says, so you want to play with magic. You should know what you're falling for. So sure, on one level, she's relating this to, and we're relating this more so to sexuality, to lust perhaps. But on another level, she's speaking what I would consider to be quite a sacred truth. That if you want to play with magic, you should know what you're falling for. Magic is not something to be played with. Much like when people say they're going to play with a Ouija board, you shouldn't play with a Ouija board any more than you should play with a pair of scissors or play with a knife or fire or a gun. You can harm yourself and you can harm other people. I don't like when people say that the Ouija board is this evil tool. If the Ouija board is an evil tool, then so is every kitchen knife that you have. So is So is your car, because people have died in car wrecks, accidents, and intentional forms of manslaughter before. Just because somebody dies or somebody's affected negatively by something doesn't mean that that tool, that device then becomes evil. I don't like this thing with the Ouija board, but that's my opinion. So Katy Perry is telling us that magic is powerful and you should know what you are, quote-unquote, playing with. She says, once you're mine, there's no going back. And the other rapper, the other musician, whatever you want to call this person, I don't even consider these people musicians. Some of them I don't even think they're talented at all. But that is purely my opinion, and I'll tell you when it's my opinion. This is not my opinion, though. This other musician, this rapper, says, Juicy J, she can be my sleeping beauty. I'm going to put her in a coma. And it's interesting because Katy Perry in that music video, Dark Horse, she personifies the winged goddess Isis. And she says in one of the lines, I think it's part of the chorus, levitate like a bird without a cage. And I had just listened to the Taylor Swift song, Look What You Made Me Do, before I watched this Dark Horse song for the first time. Watched the music video for the song, rather. And Taylor Swift, in that music video, Look What You Made Me Do, where they kill off the real Taylor Swift and she has all these alter egos, Taylor Swift is in a cage like a bird. In fact, I mentioned that to Mark earlier, and I completely forgot until I looked at some notes here that I had taken about the song, that Katy Perry sings about that too, levitate like a bird without a cage. Taylor Swift is talking about being stuck in a cage like a bird. I mean, really, do you think that's just a coincidence? It's just sheer coincidence that we see things like this that transcends the genre of music, the same type of imagery, the sex kitten mind control, the symbolism of the woods that I've gone through numerous times that you can see in literally video games, movies, music. You can see it in television. You can see it in books and graphic novels and comics. What exactly is it that is behind promoting these same common themes? I mean, at the very least, I think we have to acknowledge that even if we don't necessarily believe that there's any importance behind the usage of these types of symbols, somebody does. Somebody believes it. Somebody somewhere is actively engaged in producing material in various forms of entertainment that promotes the same theme over and over and over and over again. And since we're looking at it as just entertainment, we see it as nothing more than, in a sense, a distraction. It's kind of comical in nature. It's something not to be taken seriously, that is. But we should be taking this very seriously. You should be taking it very seriously because of the very nature of how we perceive the world. We see things, we taste things, we touch things, we hear things, we smell things, our five senses, and then we have extrasensory perception. Some feel it more than others. Now, the scientific community calls these, on occasion, hallucinations. And I saw an article I thought was perfect to end the broadcast this evening. It's from The Atlantic. It says hallucinations are everywhere, and it refers to the work of psychologist Philip Corlett and Albert Powers at the Yale School of Medicine. And they report that back in the 90s, a survey was conducted. 10 to 15% of the U.S. population, the United States population, claim that they've experienced what they called vivid sensory hallucinations at some point in their lives. In relation to the research of these psychologists at Yale University School of Medicine, they talked about something called predictive coding, which is the integrating of new information based on the beliefs built on older information. So they say that we actually build a model in our minds of what we expect to be present, and that's why we have this phantom phone syndrome, where we think we hear or feel our phone vibrate or make a sound, but it's not even in our pocket, but it feels like it vibrates. We expect it to be there, even though it isn't. The article from The Atlantic says the mental setup works great for allowing us to move smoothly through the world. So basically, we can function in daily society by processing information, but without consciously, per se, focusing on all of the little details. Our brain fills in the blanks. The researchers from Yale say that the brain then has an ability to overpredict. And because of this ability and capacity to overpredict, it can expect something to be there that isn't. And this expectation can be so strong that we actually perceive the non-existent thing. And although that might be true, and perhaps can be demonstrated in a clinical setting, it doesn't necessarily explain every case of what we call hallucinations, which in some cases are the result of various forms of substances. Hallucinations can also be quite real in the sense that if we are perceiving them through some perception, through some sense, then they are real, especially because we define our world through what we can see, what we can taste, what we can touch, what we can smell, and what we can hear. But otherwise, just because we expect something that quote-unquote isn't there doesn't mean that what isn't there isn't there. In fact, what isn't there could actually be there. We're just perceiving it through a different sense. But I think this article is really, really important because it talks essentially about the nature of reality without going so far as to make such a claim. It talks about the way that we process information, the way that we break information down, the way that we do so subconsciously. And because of that, what they call predictive coding, being able to, as the brain does, determine what we will see based on what has happened in the past, what we expect to see, what we expect to feel, taste, touch, smell, hear, the five senses. But if we are to apply this to the entertainment industry, then what we expect out of entertainment is to be entertained. We don't expect to go to a movie and to be propagandized. We don't expect to go to a movie and be sold a product, to be advertised to, guerrilla advertising, product placement. We don't go and listen to music online to be the same, propagandized. We don't think that we are going to listen to music and be brainwashed and be manipulated and have our subconscious filled with various symbols and sounds that affect us on a very deep level that might change our perception of reality. We don't think that. So that's not what we see. But when we override the assumptions of the brain and we take control to analyze what we are actually witnessing, what we are seeing, what we are hearing, more specifically in relation to music, then I think it becomes very clear that regardless of what you want to call it, there is no doubt a much darker, as Mark Devlin put it, demonic, sonic agenda. And it's one that relates to the entertainment industry as much as it does any other industry. It relates to how we decode reality, how we perceive the world. And there are those, as we talked about, going back to Edward Bernays, the father of public relations, going back and looking at propaganda, which is not always, in fact, rarely is it a lie. Propaganda is more often than not the truth. But we're given a different interpretation of the truth, a different interpretation of the facts. And so that's why on one level, Katy Perry says, you want to play with magic. You should know what you're falling for. Sure, it relates to sexuality, it relates to lust, it relates to dating and things like that. It relates to sex primarily. But she's also providing you with a very divine, sacred truth. Magic is not something to play with. Once you're mine, there's no going back. Kind of like Slender Man, once he takes you. Once you look at him, there's no unseeing him. All of this is related in some way, shape, and form, and that's all that I'm trying to do is provide you with a unique perspective on these types of subjects right here on the Secret Teachings radio broadcast. Thank you all for listening. The website, www.thesecretteachings.info. and the email is rdgable@yahoo.com. If you go to the website, get yourself a subscription, get yourself a book or a T-shirt, and support this broadcast, a broadcast in which I will not, nor have I ever, sold out to a network or to a person and allowed them to censor the content that I provide you with. Again, thank you all for listening. Mark Devlin, our guest this evening. Go check out his work, Musical Truth, Volume 1 and 2, our website, and we'll be back tomorrow evening.
Doesn't anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
I have certain rules I live by. My first rule, I don't believe anything the government tells me.
Information is not morbid. Ignorance is morbid. Ignorance is depressing. Learning this information should be liberating and free. You should have a sense of empowerment, knowing the fact that you are no longer going to be screwed over by lies.